Hello everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, September 1st, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong news recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we're going to go over to Alan, where he will sit down with Steve Boone, head of product at Checkmarx, where they're going to talk about Checkmarx's new announcement of the availability of Checkmarx API security, the first true shift-left API security solution. Alan is then going to talk with Jeff Williams, co-founder and CTO at Contrast Security, where they will discuss the current state and trends of application security, as well as the latest news from Contrast Security. Then, we're joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on to tell us more about some of the upcoming webinars we have in store for you. Then, we're going to give you another chance to watch the first episode of our new series, Engineering the Change. This series follows the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp to prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. Next, we have an episode of View with Vizard. In this episode, Mike will interview the newly appointed Ambassador Labs CEO, Steve Rada, as he explains how $20 million in additional funding will be used to make Kubernetes more accessible to developers. We then go to RSA, where Mitch sat down with Tim Eads, CEO at vArmor, to discuss why security companies must become data companies. Also at RSA, Mitch met with Oded Harivan, CEO and co-founder of Achilles, to talk about Achilles' secrets orchestration platform. Then we have another 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first, Mike interviews Vinay Jusuri, CEO at Several Nines, as he explains what is driving the rise of sovereign database as a service platforms. In the second episode, Mike interviews Yotam Segev, co-founder and CEO at Sierra, as he explains how ghost data has become a major cybersecurity problem. We then go to Open Source Summit, where Alan met with Ava Black, open source hacker at Microsoft's Azure Office of the CTO. In this interview, Alan and Ava talked about the community codes of conduct, inclusivity, and how to build sustainable, diverse communities for the open source sector and beyond. Finally, we go back to RSA one last time, where Alan sat down with Bob Martin, Senior Principal Software and Supply Chain Assurance Engineer at MITRE, as the two talked about MITRE, supply chain security issues, and common vulnerabilities and exposures. That's what we have coming for you up on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for September 1st. First up, the Justice Department lawyers are in early stages of drafting a potential antitrust complaint against Apple, with several of its prosecutors piecing together material for the potential lawsuit. While Apple has had the attention of the DOJ before with its focus on the App Store, they are now considering how Apple's control over its devices harms its competitors. This suit would be the latest legal battle for the government to rein in big tech companies that control the global internet. That being said, though, the DOJ has not made any decisions to whether or not they plan to follow through with the suit against Apple. Next, Amazon looks to be struggling to expand in India. Amazon is behind Flipkart, its main rival in India, in several key metrics as it lags in getting business in several of India's smaller cities. India is a key overseas market, as being one of the world's great growth markets and the world's second largest internet market that is only expected to double by 2025. To this end, Amazon has explored partnerships with small businesses and attempted to acquire one of India's retail chains. With this alongside of India's regulatory environment, it makes it an interesting question for how Amazon and other e-commerce giants are to expand. In other news, First Solar, the largest solar panel manufacturer in the US, said that it would build a new solar panel manufacturing plant. It says it will invest up to $1 billion in the new factory, which it plans to build somewhere in the southeast of the U.S. First Solar cited the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act as a deciding factor for it to build a factory in the U.S. instead of looking elsewhere. This announcement comes as First Solar struggles to keep up with demand for solar panels that just doesn't seem to end. It is currently sold out through 2025, but with this new plant, the company hopes it will help keep up with demand. Next up, Snap has announced that it is planning to lay off approximately 20% of its workforce. According to Snap, it has been planning this layoffs for several weeks now. This news isn't that shocking though, as its stock price has lost nearly 80% of its value since the beginning of the year. Snap, like other tech companies, aggressively hired during the pandemic. However, Snap hasn't fared too well coming out of it, due to several factors such as recession fears, as well as Apple's crackdown of ad tracking. With the layoffs, though, it hopes it can get back on track. Next, it looks like Toyota is also investing in EV battery production in the US. Similarly to Honda, Toyota announced that it would invest $5.6 billion in the US, but it also announced it would invest in Japan as well for the production of batteries of electric vehicles. Toyota has stated that production is expected to start between 2024 and 2026. While Toyota has had success with its Prius and other hybrid models, the demand for EVs is expected to grow, so it wants the flexibility it needs to meet up with the needs of its customers. On Digital CXO, we have an article looking at how to govern microservices in an enterprise architecture. With more and more companies pushing for digital transformation, microservices offer a new step toward the evolution of enterprise application development. That being said, though, they also present a new set of challenges that enterprise architects have to deal with. To learn more about why and how you should be implementing microservices in your enterprise architecture, go to Digital CXO. On Container Journal, we have an article looking at the importance of data protection and data security when it comes to containers. Containers might be temporary by nature, but the data that it contains is permanent. Data can't be treated like containers. It needs to be backed up and stored to protect it. This article tackles several of the misunderstandings when it comes to containers and data. To learn more, go to Container Journal. And finally, on DevOps.com, we have an article looking at TidalScale's announcement that it has updated its software to include the ability to detect and prevent impending failures, as well as enable IT teams to hot swap servers. With the rates of memory failure being 100 times more likely than a decade ago, this capability to hot swap servers is critical. To learn more about the new update to TidalScale's software, go to DevOps.com. And that's what today's Techstrong News recap.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another Techstrong TV interview. I'm really happy to welcome back to our show my friend Steve Boone. If you don't know Steve, he's with Checkmarx. And Steve, it's a pleasure to have you on again. Hope all is well with you.
Everything's going great, Alan. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right. Steve, for those households where you're not a household name, why don't you give them why don't you give our audience a little bit of your background? And while you're at it, you might as well give them the Checkmarx story, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah. So I started back probably with you a little while, probably at this point, what feels like a decade ago, when we were really cruising the DevOps market, focused on helping enterprises really automate continuous integration, continuous delivery, which got me into security and pretty heavily. And so, moved on over to join forces with Checkmarx. And since then, we've been really focusing on helping developers really pay more attention to how they can be more security minded and bring security focused solutions to them.
I mean, that's the classic DevSecOps tale, right?
Gotta like it, right? It's good.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, Checkmarx. Look, Checkmarx has been around now. Geez, I'm going to guess it's probably closer to 12 years.
Yeah, you're right on that. I think we were founded in 2006. I want to say so.
Yeah,
it's cruising along. And we've transformed a lot. We went from, as essentially a SaaS company to really transforming ourselves into a platform player, where we've got, a number of different point solutions now, where the idea being you can, single click and scan across multiple engines.
Yep. I mean, look, originally, the state of art in AppSec back then was SAST and DAST, right? Static and dynamic scans. Checkmarx actually has paved the way with several other, categories. And as you said, today offers a full range of scanning and security tools as they've expanded, which I guess brings us to today's news.
Yeah,
right. That was my segue, as we call it in the business, Steve. Why don't you share with our audience a little bit about the news?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully you guys, everyone made it back from Black Hat successfully, and hopefully no worse for the wears, and no nasty viruses to bring back home to the family. We had a really big announcement out there around API security. So we just formally launched our API security offering, which differentiated in a number of ways, but we're really, again, focused on helping developers put their organizations and their applications in a better what I'll call API security posture, right? Giving them visibility into all of the APIs that they know about, and really starting to be able to call out differences between documentation from what we see in the code, what we might have formally documented in, let's say, a Swagger file, and shedding light on some of those zombie and shadow APIs that we know are causing a lot of chaos for a number of organizations.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned, we're helping developers with this, because, the API security market is a market we've looked closely and covered closely at Techstrong for as long as, we've seen API security companies. And as you know, Steve, there are several startups that are solely focused on API security. That's all they do.
That's right.
And that's typical usually of an early market, right? Where you'll get that, and some may say, well, that's a feature, not a product, right? And eventually, this gets brought in either through acquisition or in the case like a Checkmarx, developing your own into a wider offering, a platform, whatever you want to call it. But really, what we've seen is the question of who's the customer in API security. Is it the security person, who obviously is concerned about security, or is it the developer who oftentimes is making or building these API calls into the application? Is it the ops guy who has to run these applications and really doesn't have a map, if you will, or an SBOM or something, right, of what APIs are in there and what he's actually hitting? And in many ways, this is the classic DevSecOps.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There are a number of interested personas that all care about doing the right thing, but I see it quite largely as who do we give the responsibility to solve the problem, right? So many folks are involved in identifying and alerting and letting us know, hey, we think trouble's in town. But ultimately, we give that challenge back to development, and we say, look, we need you to either fix these, right? Because at some point, as a security operations guy, I can just disable the API and be like, look, that's problematic. But we want to get that feature, especially if it's valuable endpoint, back up and running, and that's going to take a development cycle, right? What we've discovered is that when we're talking with our clients, the large majority of them, I think it's 46%, say that they have some formal process for documenting APIs, some. And out of those, only like 30-some% say that it's actually good coverage, that they actually have a good process and they can keep up with it. There's a lot of challenges, even for companies that are capable of documenting these APIs, they fall out of sync with what's actually running in production. And it's mostly because it's a challenging thing to go do. A lot of development teams now are solely assembled just to develop APIs. And just because you're a good, let's say, web app developer and you know good security practices around coding for web apps, those are different set of challenges when you're trying to do secure coding for APIs. So the skill sets aren't completely one-to-one. And a lot of the, what I'll say, creative solutions that are out there today are primarily focused on production. They're looking at analyzing your network traffic, right? And they'll bring those findings back to you and say, hey, this looks like an attack on these APIs. Do you think it's an attack? Do you want to do something with this information? And largely, even if you were able to identify it as an attack, how do you take that little bit of network traffic data that you have and then find the appropriate development team in your global organization who can actually go and fix that? And so there's a disconnect between some of the solutions that are out there and what I think is like that true DevOps feedback cycle of being able to bring these results, shift it left, find the problems earlier in development so that you're not waiting in production to find out whether or not you're being attacked, right? To me, there's this idea of API protection and then really API security, like knowing and working and practicing the better coding skills to write and deliver more secure APIs. And that's largely where our focus is providing that visibility. We're starting at the code. So when we're scanning code, we're able to bring you full breadth of all the APIs. And with that, we can go and start talking about generating documentation or differences in documentation, but really help the developers know where the risks are. And if you were trying to put a security program together to say, hey, we want to prioritize and enrich our APIs in a security standpoint, this data around what you have, what's documented, what's internal, what's external is extremely valuable.
Yeah, Steve, I'm listening to you here, and I like what I hear. Because to me, this is now sort of Gen 2 for API Sec. I think the first generation of API security tools was based on the premise you can't defend what you don't know, right? So they were very much about mapping out what APIs you had, right? At least let me give you a list of the API calls you're making. And that was better than what we had before, right? So it's valuable. Now it sounds like Checkmarx is saying, okay, here's the APIs that you have, API calls you're making, and now we're going to start documenting what APIs these are, what they do, how they work, how they're configured, what calls they're making, so that we can be smart about securing them. So it's not enough just to know they exist, but let me take it to the next step and tell you really a lot about them so that we can get smart about protecting them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think a lot of folks from, security operations teams say, look, even if I just had an understanding of what the whole landscape of our APIs looked like, right? That's a start. So you're back to your point, that idea around visibility. But, while we're also scanning code, we're looking for other things like, to your point, SAST vulnerabilities, right? Other things that we can pull in. And now all of a sudden we can make correlations to these things, right? Not only do we have these sets of APIs, but we can put ultimately what we're driving towards is a risk assessment based on these APIs, right? Are they sharing sensitive data? Well, if so, how much or what types? Do they have known, SAST vulnerabilities that we're finding associated in that same project, that same code base? And so when we start to do that, now we can make a case for why we should have better prioritization. We want to lift up some of these findings because there's other things attached to them that we know about. And I think that's helpful too, right? At the end of the day, developers, we're giving them all the responsibility for all of the stuff. And so if you want them to make good decisions around security, they're going to have a limited amount of time to go and do that. Where do you want them to focus that time and effort at? I think the business overall knows what are the most valuable endpoints in their applications that they need to monitor and secure and take care of. I think a lot of times, though, when we are developing and innovating on applications, we're making a lot of changes. Things that we intend to be internal APIs, when you test them, sometimes you make them external. And those, don't always go back and get patched up. So as we start even seeing the evolution and kind of change of APIs over time, as we bring in new developers who may not be intimately familiar with how it was originally designed, right? All of that changes over time, and it's our kind of duty to let people know when stuff change, what's changing, and how you can best protect yourself going forward.
Excellent, man. Steve, let's go to the business side of the house on this.
Sure.
Right. For those who aren't familiar, Checkmarx does have a SaaS kind of scanning offering as well as others. I know from talking to you and other Checkmarx folks in the past, a lot of times if you're an existing Checkmarx customer and you have, I guess it's the enterprise or whatever, the premium one, a lot of these new offerings are actually rolled up into it as part of it. They're just added in. Is that the I don't want to put pressure on you, but is that the case here? Is
no, it's 100%. So earlier this year, we had the big announcement of our Checkmarx One platform, right. Which again, right, that's our SaaS platform where you've got all of our different engines that are a part of that. And with the goal there being that we can start to aggregate data and correlate it, right? We also had this announcements around Checkmarx Fusion, which is our correlation engine. And that's where the beauty of having this all in one place really starts to pay dividends, because we can look at your SaaS data next to, let's say, the data that we get from the API security engine or the data that we pull out of one of our other engines. And now all of a sudden, when we pull that together, we can start doing a couple of cool things, right? One, there's improved prioritization. We were kind of talking about that already. I'm seeing multiple engines across different hits. I can pull out the data and say, hey, this is more important and more risky than other things. But you also get the things that a lot of SaaS customers struggle with, which is just around, you get a lot of false positives. How do you reduce those false positives? And by, finding multiple hits across different engines, we can say, hey, we know for sure this is actually a thing, right? This isn't a false positive. We're getting this finding several times. And then I think the really cool thing that it does, if you have multiple engines today, especially across different vendors, your DaaS solution might find, let's say, a SQL injection, and so might your SaaS. But now as a developer, I'm finding out about the same thing twice. And there's a lot of redundancy there. And it's like, I got to go and did we already fix this? I got to keep track of it in multiple places. And so just the idea of that we can consolidate those findings and say, hey, look, the SaaS thing we found over here and the DaaS thing we found over here, those are the same thing. And so you're not going to have layers upon layers of just thousands of vulnerabilities overwhelming your development team. And so that's the beauty of the platform in a whole is the being able to look across all that data. And yes, that's exactly where if you were interested in learning about our API security scanning capabilities, you'd find that on our Checkmarx One platform.
Excellent. And just to tie a bow on that, if people are interested in going to check out Checkmarx One platform, is it at the main checkmarx.com? That's CHECKMARX?
You got it. Absolutely. And, feel out to reach out to me on social media or anywhere else too. We'd love to show folks around and answer any questions they might have.
All right. Hey, Steve, I love it. I like to see, look, and let me just say a word. These vendors who have been out here, they're kind of one-trick ponies. API Sec is what they do. And I don't mean that in a bad way, right? These people kind of were the missionaries evangelizing the need for API Sec. But when we see a company like Checkmarx, and we see some of the other larger companies recently that have, recognized this as a market, as a problem, it's validation. Right, and it takes sometimes it takes the whole industry.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing too. I think it's a very valid point. And we talk about some of these different more point solutions. API security is going to be a lot like application security in the sense that it's kind of a patchwork quilt. What I mean by that is, it's not one size fit all. You're going to need a little bit of different types of solutions to really get full coverage in that area. And yeah, you're going to want some runtime protection. You're going to need a good API gateway. But I think the thing that's largely overlooked and missing is this, well, how do we get it fixed? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? I don't always want to be reactive. I want to be proactive about making APIs more secure. And I think that's where, Checkmarx has our best opportunity today.
I agree with you, man. All right. Hey, Steve, we look forward to seeing you soon. Keep up the great work. Say hello to everyone at Checkmarks. Thanks for being on Techstrong TV.
Thanks so much, Alan. Appreciate it as always, and hope to talk to you soon.
All right, man. Bye-bye. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back here on Techstrong TV. I'm really happy to be joined by my friend Jeff Williams. We haven't had Jeff on in way too long. Probably because, you know what? At one time, Jeff was the single voice for Contrast Security, but as they've grown, so have their voices. And we've had Larry Moncheroni on many times and several of the other Contrast folks, but it's great to have Jeff back. Jeff, how are you?
I'm good, Alan. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you. You know, Jeff, I take it for granted. People know who Jeff Williams are. They may not. Why don't we start that, Jeff? Give them a little bit of the Jeff Williams story.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CTO and co-founder at Contrast Security. We offer a AppSec platform that will support a whole AppSec program from development all the way through production. I've been in AppSec for over 20 years now. I helped to start OWASP. I was the global chair there for the first 10 years. I wrote the OWASP Top 10 and led a bunch of other open source projects that are pretty popular. And I worked as a consultant in AppSec for many years. So I had the privilege of working on some of the world's most critical applications and doing the security, doing both architecture as well as testing and pen testing and code review. So it's interesting to have that perspective. I've seen so many apps in so many different companies that I just feel like I really understand, the problems in our software.
Absolutely. And that's great. Jeff, while we're at it, people may not be familiar with Contrast Security. We might as well give them a little of that too before we jump into what we want to talk about.
Yeah. So, look, most of the tools in application security came out in the early 2000s. There's static analysis tools, dynamic analysis tools, web app firewalls. They're all kind of what I'd call outside-in tools. They operate without the full context of what's going on inside the running application. So we had a simple insight 8 years ago when we founded Contrast. We said, if we could get inside the running application, like an APM tool, like a New Relic or an App Dynamics for performance, but we'll do that same thing for security. We said we could be way more accurate. We could be a much more natural part of the software development process. So we can work at DevOps speed in context and provide really accurate data about whether you have vulnerabilities, whether you have library problems, or whether you're being attacked in production. We can do all of that with this one approach. Instead of having to buy, 4 or 5 different AppSec tools and build a team around each one of them, we can help you add AppSec to your whole program with sort of one simple integration.
Absolutely, and been very successful at it. So for folks out here, if you haven't guessed it yet or you haven't surmised from what Jeff's told you, look, you got one of the guys who really helped start the modern AppSec movement, and Contrast, which is the company he co-founded, has quickly become a leader in the AppSec space by not only offering, as Jeff says, the outside-in kind of view stuff, the typical stuff that a lot of folks in AppSec are doing, but by also being innovative and creative in giving different views and different insights and different technologies to help you with all phases of application security. So Jeff, with all that kind of background, as we sit here now, Black Hat was, I guess, a week or two ago, and was, of course, a lot of announcements and news coming out of that. But if you wouldn't mind, share with our readers a little bit of the state of the market, a little bit of the state of the industry, the state of the technology around AppSec from your vantage point.
Yeah, so I've been doing this a long time, and everyone always thinks AppSec is really important. They're like, yeah, we want to get the code secure, we want to get the library secure, but frankly, for many years, it seemed a little stagnant in AppSec. because there wasn't a lot of innovation. But I'm actually super excited right now because of what's going on in the AppSec market. So I think the executive order, the cybersecurity executive order that came out was really exciting. Everyone should read it. It's only 3 pages long, and it's a really good summary of kind of the problems in the software market that are leading to security problems. And so they squarely put it on a market problem, an economic problem in the market. And they did something about it. They said, hey, we've got a problem in the market that's based on people not understanding what security is in software. Because it's difficult to know. I bet you bank online, right? Well, what's in that software that you're trusting your finances to? What do you know about it? Do you know who wrote it or who tested it or what tools they used or whether it has known vulnerabilities? Do you know that it's better than some other bank? Probably none of that, right?
Right.
But I believe it's a fundamental right. You should have the right to know about the security of the software that you're trusting everything important in your life to. And so that's the problem that the EO focuses on. And most people, the first thing they'll see in the EO is SBOMs, right? They're like, everybody's got to produce an SBOM if you want to sell to the federal government. Okay, that's cool. That's a little bit of transparency. I think of it as like a baby step, but it's actually really driven some change in the market. Yeah, I think before our call, you said open source is the beating heart of the software industry. And I think you're right. It's really important. And so what it's done is it's shine a spotlight on open source, and people are starting to realize, wow, I got a lot of open source and a lot of vulnerable open source. And what's really interesting, I think, is that they're starting to pull back the covers a little bit. They're starting to realize, hey, you know what? Only 38% of the open source in my apps is ever even loaded into memory. It's not attackable at all. And with the right tools like Contrast, you can see that. And so you can focus on the pieces that are truly attackable. And then studies have been saying only 15% is actually exploitable. So a tiny percentage is actually exploitable. So the trick is like zooming in on that. So that's SBOMs. Very exciting. I think it's put a lot of interest in the market. So that's all good. But it's kind of just the first step. The EO goes further. It says, hey, we're going to direct NIST to create a minimum standard for application security testing. That seems like a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's pretty good. It says you got to do a little threat model. You got to test what defenses your threat model says you need to have. You got to produce evidence that you tested them, and you got to fix vulnerabilities that you found in the software. That's a big step. I know hundreds of companies that they run AppSec testing tools. They generate a big pile of vulnerabilities. They stick them in a vulnerability management system, and they sit there. The average time to fix AppSec vulnerability, if you're using static analysis tools, is 290 days.
Wow.
That's just crazy long. We need that to be a week or less. And we can do it with better tools that fit better with modern DevOps. We can do that for sure. And then the last thing in the EO, and I'm super excited about this because I've been talking about this since the early 2000s, is the idea of software security labels. It's a way of intervening in the software market, just like the way that you have labels on restaurants in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to go into something that's a C or a D, right? You go to restaurants that have an A on the window. Well, that's what we can do for software. And there is already a labeling program in Singapore and Finland for Internet of Things devices.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing something similar here for IoT as well as for consumer software, including websites and things like that. So I think that could be really, really powerful and could absolutely change the market. Because the AppSec industry has been kind of fighting against the market, right? And you'll never win. The market always wins. So we got to fix the market. So that's what the EO does, and I'm super excited about it.
I was too, and I still continue to be. Jeff, I think of it this way. The SBOM stuff to me is sort of like the ingredients panel mandated for food, right? I want to know what's in this. What are the ingredients in this processed food I bought or food? But then I also want to know how many calories it has. And I want to know, the analysis of carbs to protein to what have you, right? I want to know more about that quality, if you will. And to me, that's what the EO is really about, is it's giving me that same sort of insight into my software if I want it. I mean, well, before I get into that, 1 second. Look, we always bitch about the government being bloated and not knowing what end is up and being the last to find out and just not conducive to private industry. This is a case where they really came out and threw down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
And said, hey, this is it. And I haven't met many security people who say, oh, that's ridiculous or that's wrong. No, I think we all agree it's right. I think the question is, though, where consumers love the idea of the ingredients list on their food. They love being able to say how much carbs and protein and so forth. They love that insight. They love that transparency. Are people going to embrace their software the same way?
So here's the interesting thing about that. And I went back and studied a whole bunch of different labeling regimes over the years, including the FDA's nutrition facts label. And people did not like it when it came out. Mm-hmm. It was very poorly adopted. And it took 20 years for people to really start reading those labels. But here's the cool thing is it doesn't really matter, because almost instantly when they produced that, producers of food cleaned up their act. And so the initial impact of these labels is not on consumers, even though it looks like it's for consumers. The initial impact is actually on software producers who their lawyers are not going to let them go to market with something that says like, you have critical vulnerabilities and, you know,
it's kind of like the label on
and all that.
This is going to kill you. Yeah, doesn't stop some people from buying them, but another story.
But the problem with ingredients labels, another problem is that with software, the same list of ingredients could be used to make something that's fantastic software, and it could be a complete disaster from a security perspective. So just because you have the SBOM doesn't really tell you anything about whether
it has to be more than the SBOM.
So that's right. It has to be more, and that's what we're pushing for. So we'll get there.
Cool. Talk to us a little. What else from where you're sitting in way of AppSec?
Well, so I think that's going to affect everybody. I think everybody's going to be pushed towards more transparency around their AppSec programs. I think companies should start now. They should start, thinking about how they would tell the world about their AppSec program. And if they're ashamed of it, then they should take steps to fix it, because pretty soon they're going to be forced to disclose a lot more about how they build software. So they kind of got to get ready.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about API security a little bit. There's some new companies in the market related to API security. It's something that we do really well at Contrast. And it's interesting because I think the traditional approaches to AppSec don't work that well on APIs, like SAST, DAST, and WAF. They're not great at it because APIs are more complicated. The protocols are more complicated. The frameworks are more complicated. And so the outside-in approach doesn't really work as well. So I encourage folks to kind of look under the covers at the API security tools. And if they're just repackaging like a DAST and a WAF, which is what a bunch of them do, right? They're like a gateway, and they package in sort of a WAF and a DAST in a gateway. And they say, hey, we'll test your APIs if you give us your open API spec or whatever. It's pretty weak approach. And I really think what you want to make sure that you've got great API testing. You want to make sure it can test the libraries in your APIs. You want to make sure that it can protect your APIs from being attacked. And kind of those capabilities are something that, the contrast technology that we work inside out on really, really help with. Absolutely. So I think there'll be a lot of action in that space for a while, because more than half of the applications that we monitor and protect, that's hundreds of thousands of apps and APIs, more than half of them are APIs. Most modern apps are like APIs on the server side and rich client stuff in the browser. And so you really got to get your game straight on API security.
I think there's a lot of work needs to be done there, Jeff, because I think most organizations haven't even hit the threshold of knowing what it is they have before they can even talk about, is it secure, protected, whatever. Yeah. They don't even have a list of APIs, the shadow APIs. There's all kinds of stuff.
I've been thinking about that recently because a lot of people really they want to focus on inventory and discovery, and it is important. But my concern is that if you order things like, well, first I got to get an inventory, and then I'm going to go start worrying about securing things, you'll never finish the inventory. Right. It's constantly changing. So I really think of it as more like you really need 3 parallel threads, and you should start them all running. One is inventory. And you should be continuously deploying technology to make sure that when new things get pushed out, you bring them into the inventory and they become part of the program. Even low code and no code stuff. Like you want to make sure you're
yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's too much of that out there not to anymore.
So that's one thread. But at the same time, you have to have a thread going that says, hey, for everything that I know about in my inventory, I'm going to do some security testing on it. And you can't wait or else you'll never get there. And then the last leg of the stool is runtime protection. If you're deploying apps and APIs without runtime protection these days, you're nuts. There's too many 0 days. There's too many new vulnerabilities in your custom code. You need to have that runtime protection to help make that stuff unexploitable. And I'll give you a quick story. That's really like the only way that the security industry has ever really made progress is by strengthening platforms. You talk about training developers and, doing testing and all that. Like that's treating the symptoms. But if you want to really eliminate whole classes of vulnerabilities, then you need to make the platform stronger so that those vulnerabilities are impossible to create or impossible to exploit. And that's what runtime protection does. And it's very much like what happened in buffer overflows and kernel exploits back in the early 2000s. We had kernel exploits all the time. You remember?
Yeah, I do.
Well, we introduced new technologies, particularly ASLR and DEP.
Yep.
Data execution prevention. And those technologies changed the game, made it much harder to exploit those vulnerabilities. And the kernel exploits went down. We don't hear about them very much anymore because of that. That's what runtime protection does for the application layer. That's what it does for your web apps and your web APIs. It makes those vulnerabilities, which are going to be there. There's going to be another one probably tomorrow in some library that everybody uses. But, our customers through Log4Shell and Spring4Shell, they were all safe.
Yeah.
We didn't have to deploy a new rule. We protected against the fundamental classes of vulnerabilities. Expression language injection, unsafe deserialization. Those are the flaws that those attacks target. And we make those very difficult to exploit, if not impossible. And so it's just cover. So you can go back and fix those libraries. It just gives you time to breathe and not have to have a fire drill.
Agreed. Jeff, I know we had one or two other things I wanted to hit, but we're already over time, I'm afraid. So I'm going to need you to come back on. I mean, we try to keep these to 15 minutes. I think we're closer to 25 already.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. We're talking shop.
Yeah.
Do me a favor. Maybe I'll have our people talk to your folks. Let's get you on in the next week or so, because I want to continue this conversation. Just way of blatant plugging. This is really important to me. We have, I think it's September 13th, AppSec API Sec virtual event. Larry Marshall from Contrast will be one of our keynote speakers. I think he's first thing in the morning, actually. He's the first speaker out of the chute.
He's a great speaker. You got to listen to him. He's fantastic.
Check it out.
Jeff, but I'd like to have you before then to do another interview. We can continue what's going on in the AppSec world.
I think
let's talk about our free offering, our CodeSec tool.
Do it quick. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say next time we can talk about that.
All right, we'll
come check out CodeSec. It's free and awesome for everybody. Static analysis, SEA, and serverless analysis. You can find it on our website.
Hey, this is only part one. Jeff will be back for part two. We're going to start with CodeSec, a free analysis tool. But you don't have to wait for part two. You can go to Contrast Security and check it out right now. Jeff, we'll see you in about a week.
Thanks, Alan. Have a great day.
All right, Jeff Williams, Contrast Security. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. Cody J. Brown here with some upcoming programs here at Techstrong Learning. So we do have a light schedule for the first week of September, as Monday, September 5th is Labor Day. So we won't have any programs for you until Wednesday, which that actually leads me to Wednesday, September 7th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Shoreline and DevOps.com present Market Research, the surprising cost of on-call operations. Now, this program will reveal some surprising data on the cost of on-call, its biggest drivers, and key recommendations for reducing costs while also improving the customer experience. The following day, on Thursday, September 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern, AWS, Aqua Security, and Container Journal bring you Security and Assurance for AWS Fargate Containers. This how-to session will cover how DevOps teams can more easily automate and take advantage of AWS Fargate services to speed the delivery cycle and ensure proper security and risk management. And right after that program at 3 p.m. Eastern, hosted on ContainerJournal.com, Fairwinds has a presentation and demo titled Open Source Project Goldilocks, How to Right-Size Kubernetes. The practices we will go over will help you optimize your resources and manage your Kubernetes costs. So that's all I've got for you right now, but we do always have plenty of upcoming and on-demand programs here for you at Techstrong Learning. Have a great weekend, everyone.
The Engineering the Change Scholarship Program offers a life-changing opportunity for a winner from an underrepresented community to change their lives by becoming a full-stack software developer.
The background that you might see that it's a weakness, it's a strength in this field because everyone is constantly looking for people that are going to bring new ideas.
It's an intense 12-week course that is not for the timid.
For real, who's mastering this right now? Because I sure am not.
So you guys are badass. Like as a class, you guys are crushing it.
You've got to be dedicated. You've got to be ready to do it. Your life has to be ready for it. Follow us as we go through this cohort's Engineering the Change winner on their journey to becoming full-stack engineers.
Welcome!
Say with great power comes great responsibility.
Take it down to three finalists. Toria, I'm going to ask you, who really kind of stood out for you?
The three people that stood out to me the most was Stephanie and another woman named Carly and a man named Donald.
Mitchell, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. Actually, I think those are three great candidates, and
I mean, you know very well, right, what it takes to go through this process. Look, I still love good written and oral skills. I like people who can speak well. I like people who really could write well.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you something. To your point about Stephanie, is it Stephanie Sanchez? Yeah, Stephanie Sanchez. Her essay was one of the best essays I've ever read in the 3 or 4 times we've done this.
Yeah.
Okay. And bring her into
the golden
finals.
buzzer.
So,
She's in.
The two other people you mentioned, to me, Carly epitomizes why we do this.
Yeah.
She said something like, her brothers could do it, why couldn't she? Mm-hmm. Right? Wasn't that in the essay?
Yeah. That's something that stuck with me, especially as a woman.
Yeah.
Because I think that for her, she was like, if they can do it and there's not enough women in tech, like she was like, I can do it too. And I love that.
I say send Carly to Hollywood.
Golden buzzer?
Yeah. Donald Bazell, really nice guy. What I liked about his essay is his genuineness. Is that a word?
Yeah, like being genuine.
He's genuine.
Yeah.
Right? You got it from him. My only caveat on this is he really doesn't have any tech experience.
Yeah.
So if it's your vote and Mitchell, you don't object, I say let's give Donald the last ticket to Hollywood. And those are our 3 finalists for Engineering the Change. Let's bring them in for interviews and pick our winner.
Okay.
Sounds fun.
Sounds
All
good.
right. We'll see you on the next show.
This is Techstrong TV.
Guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Steve Rhoda, who's the newly appointed CEO for Ambassador Labs, and they just received $20 million in additional funding. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael.
I don't think a lot of people know Ambassador Labs. It's not quite a household name just yet, but what attracted you to the company, and what do you think is going to be the opportunity around this whole Kubernetes space?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been a developer my whole life. I started coding at 8 years old, and my dad's 286, so that probably dates me a little bit. But I've long since wanted to make software development easier, more attainable, like quicker, faster. I've been just passionate about developer-based products and things to help speed that up. So that's what drew me. Obviously, Kubernetes is huge. It's getting, bigger by the minute, it seems. And with that, the complexities and, that go all around it are exploding as well. So the fact that, came across Ambassador looking to solve those problems, and simplify those things for the Kubernetes developer's life is really what brought me here. So, yeah.
Yeah. And the $20 million is coming from where, and what's it going to be allocated towards?
Yeah, it's mostly from Insight Venture Partners. They're the ones who led the round, it's doubling down on our success thus far. We have 2 products, EdgeStack and Telepresence. EdgeStack's the API gateway, so continued development on there. And Telepresence is the thing that I think is really differentiates the company as a whole and will lead to the future of Kubernetes kind of development. I think it'll revolutionize kind of how we test and deploy things. So doubling down on Telepresence as well and making sure it gets the investment that it needs. And then look, we're not a household name yet, but in order to do that, you got to invest in marketing and the company as a whole, and overall build out some of the plumbing and things like that. Now that we know we have product to market fit and can be successful in the space.
It seems like finally there's a lot more focus on developers and Kubernetes, and especially productivity. It's taken a while to get to this point. So where do you think we are? And are developers starting to make the shift to Kubernetes? Because we've been talking about the platform for a while, but the developer community kind of slow to come around.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting question. It's one obviously we talk about every day here at Ambassador, right? That who's actually making the Kubernetes decision? Is it the developers? Is it what used to be DevOps, the switch to GitOps, like putting all of the kind of ops all on the development side of things, like who's leading the charges for all those kinds of trends, which I think will ultimately push the desire to have Kubernetes based environments out there. So everything we see in the market is it's trending that way. And we think that that's gonna bring a whole new set of challenges to developers that our tooling can help fix and really kind of accelerate the developers' kind of life on Kubernetes and hopefully minimize that impact of maintaining kind of the full stack, if you will.
Do you think developers are somewhat still intimidated by Kubernetes? And part of the issue is it takes a while to set up the whole environment. So by the time they have an idea, then they think about what's involved in the setup and they decide to go do something else.
Yeah, I think absolutely it's intimidating, but production environments, dev environments, operations, IT, these things are has been an issue and like friction points from the dawn of software, right? And so I like to call it like kind of managing to the pendulum, right? Like, I remember when we would work straight on production and a lot of like mission critical systems, I won't name any of them, and then test kind of the impact of what would happen throughout. And for better or worse, it was faster way to develop type of things, but led to all kinds of security challenges and, everything else amongst it. Like Kubernetes kind of puts you, in a place where you can simulate those environments without obviously having to cause those problems. And we see like the largest companies that we have having 2 or 3 full scale kind of deployments that they have internally that they're testing to. Now, in the largest companies, which is typically the ones that we're talking to that do have more mature Kubernetes deployments, we don't see everybody hosting the entire environments on their development machine, which you can do if you're a smaller type of company or smaller type of application that you're building. But if you tried to do some of these larger ones that we're working with, your machine would literally catch on fire. So, and we actually had a customer say that. So, building tooling that helps you kind of connect into remote environments helps the developer kind of have the freedom and the power to change those environments and then watch what the impact is before it all gets deployed out there. Those are all the things that I think is going to help speed up that loop, down the road and get it from end to end. But it is still early days. And if you can run it on your machine, it makes a lot of sense. Outside of that, you need more advanced tooling to help make sense of it all.
We hear a lot about the shift left and full stack. And I guess my question to you is, do you think that developers are going to run things end to end completely, or are we looking for some sort of medium where the ops side of the house can lean more to the left a little bit, but the developers don't have the time to run everything themselves or even the desire?
We had kind of a sales training this week, and somebody asked the question like, why are we shifting left? And my answer to it was like, well, we're shifting left because we're on the right now. So it's like, and when they get left, they'll say we should shift right. You know what I mean? So that's the way the kind of pendulum swings in the development world. So, I think I'm more of a happy middle ground type of person. I think that it's the likely set of the future where this thing will settle when we stop the pendulum swinging is that, your developers are responsible for the microservices that they have. I mean, that's the big reason for the microservices in general, right? Is that you're smaller complexity, you're kind of faster to work inside of a smaller box that's there. So developers being responsible for, one microservice or one small tiny piece of the application is probably where we're headed in my book. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but that's what I would think. And then, operations teams and that type of stuff are going to be in charge of the whole architecture, how they all fit together, and the ultimate deployment and security of those types of things. So I think that's where we'll settle, this kind of concept that developers are going to do everything throughout and can do like 4 jobs, before when they were doing one, I don't think is likely. But I think we'll find that happy medium.
how will we address that security challenge you just mentioned? Because at least in my experience, most of the developers, when they were in college, security was an elective and hardly any of them ever took it. So what is the role of security? Does the security team get involved? How do we bring all this together?
Yeah, security and documentation, right? Those are the two electives that folks generally don't do that much in college. So look, I think there are some things that do need to shift left and should be left as early on. And two things, people are understanding security needs to be first and foremost these days. I think that's a good trend that should stay and is important for developers to know from the beginning. And how do developers know things from the beginning? Well, you bake it in from the start, like whatever story you're working on or whatever the case is, those kind of requirements have to be involved in the development from earlier on. So the sooner those things can get involved and better from a security perspective. The other thing is just design and complexity. This is something I think is a major problem that's kind of gone away with, shifting left and shifting right too, is people and agile in general, as people have kind of forgotten about the big picture, right? Like, so what does the overall architecture look like? How does it interplay with each other? What are the dependency maps that kind of go through those like concepts that, we did 20 some odd years ago, but through the kind of push to go faster and faster may have dropped off. And so I think, the answer to those things are, you need to start that before you start developing, and kind of go back to some of those practices will help us shift left.
All right. Well, let's just imagine, if you would, for a moment, that you have been appointed king of all things Kubernetes for a day. What's that one thing you wish they would all kind of focus on and fix and make the developer's life a little easier?
That's a great question. So I think for us in terms of developing, it's what is the Kubernetes happy path? Anytime you're dealing in amounts of configuration and kind of an ambiguous sort of like do whatever you want with it type of deployments, it creates challenges that are unforeseen, especially when you're trying to roll out to multiple customers. So I would think, not locking it down, but at least defining what the happy path is a little bit more for Kubernetes and those types of deployments would be helpful.
All right. Hey, Steve, congratulations on the new role and the funding.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate the time.
And thanks for being on the show and sharing your knowledge and insights.
Absolutely.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Well, the distinct pleasure of being joined by Tim Eads. Welcome, Tim. Tim, CEO with vArmor. And great to be talking with you at RSA. I think that's what we're going to talk about. It's kind of, we're all at RSA. What is that all about? Tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about vArmor.
So first of all, great to be here. Fantastic to be at RSA. It's been 2+ years, and a lot of swap your Zoom seats for your plane seats. Come on in, and it's okay. So I'm Tim Eads. I'm the CEO of vArmor. We have a solution called the Relationship Cloud. We help people understand their risk and reduce that risk against ransomware by going in and understanding relationships and dependencies of applications, users, and infrastructure. So without putting agents down or API agents or anything down into your infrastructure, we suck the value out, build a relationship map to understand relationships and dependencies. And then from there, you can see what is happening, what should happen, and take control of what you want to have happen.
All those dots you have, but not how to connect.
It's crazy.
Right?
People don't know what's talking to what. It's just that's how life is.
How about your background? Tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, I'm English. I'm an old punk. I used to have a big Tomahawk Mohican bleach white Dr. Martin boots.
I remember that. No, I don't. I'm just kidding.
A bit of a hooligan. Started off in finance, decided finance was boring, moved into marketing, moved into sales, and then ended up being a CEO in the security industry.
Found your place, right?
Found your place. The good thing about security is you get fresh fruit every day. And as I've got older, it's my third company, you have a real opportunity to pass on and mentor other people. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big believer in leaning in and mentoring and building a community about trying to make this enterprise the enterprise is more secure, the country's more secure, and ultimately the end user is more secure.
Well, Tim, it's great to be back together. We're all kind of craved that being around other people again instead of just on the other side of the Zoom screen. And, I think the theme, what I hear from multiple people is, it's about being together, but we have to work together in new and different ways. We've got to up our game for security because it's not getting easier, it's not getting better. Everyone else is getting more sophisticated and we aren't going to do it on our own. And we've got to band together. We've got to pull together as a real community.
Yeah, I honestly, I can't agree more. If you look at the world, the situation in the Ukraine, the strain that's put on the whole world, the political system, the rise of attacks, the rise of ransomware attacks, the mission has never been clearer. And the requirement for the community to work together has never been clearer. It's great. I was with Jen Easterly this week. She's talking about more and more public and private collaboration for that community to really lean in. So we're seeing that from the administration. But it's good to be back here, and the mission isn't lost. It was hard to do it over Zoom, to feel the same way, and the passion. But the mission to secure the enterprises, the countries, and the users, still there. And it's just great to be among people who share your same passion.
Sometimes that disruption causes you to reconnect and engage further, lean in, like
totally.
The term you're talking about. Well, tell us about, I'm really curious about vArmor. You talk a lot about relationships. And I'm an old data guy, right? So
sure.
And that always goes back to relationships and data that we're protecting and data obviously that you're collecting.
Yeah.
But it's, putting the dots together, connecting those dots is more than just the lines. It's the context of how
100%.
those things fit together and why.
Yeah, I mean, so 10, 12 years ago, you talked a lot about application security, right? 5 years ago, 7 years ago, you talked about workload security, container security, really. But over the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to talk about data security. Data security is going to come in a whole bunch of different ways. Data at rest, data at use, data in motion, all that kind of stuff. But also data flows and how things are supported by the application. So we believe relationships matter, right? So relationships, workload A talks to B, talks to C, talks to D. You move B to the cloud, A, C, and D break. Unless you didn't understand it. If B gets compromised, A, C, and D are infected. So, those relationships and those dependencies are tremendously important, particularly as you weave in users and everything else to it. But then as you move forward, data dependency and data relationships become in place because data is more distributed than ever before. So as data moves out of a Snowflake or a Hadoop cluster into an app to serve it, to provide its function, you need to understand its lineage and how it flows. So we're big believers in relationships matter. RSA is all about that, obviously, because you can build a community. But it's how our product is designed and how our customers use it. Is because you do need data to understand relationships. You do need to understand data dependencies, and that will move into data for sure.
Well, too, it's all over the organization. In my view, there's no such thing as IT anymore. I mean, calling IT is kind of about 20 years past due, getting rid of that term because a large percentage in some organizations is the majority of the technology investment, technology spend is happening in marketing and business units and all over the company. And then we do acquisitions and mergers and things really get mixed up. And thinking about that interconnection of data, how it's used, where it can break, how we secure it across that fabric that's in motion in some ways.
Yeah.
It's not a static thing. It might be static for the point in time you look at it, but by the time you've turned away and looked at something else, it's probably already changed.
And incredibly hard for the security organization to look after, right? I mean, because you need to understand what is happening in your environment, difficult to do across all those business units and mergers and acquisitions that you just talked about. Then you need to look at what should happen, mapping that to policy. Should these things even have a relationship? mapping that to policy at scale, and then turning around and say, actually, now I want to take control. Very difficult. So the security organizations, where, to your point, you're right, there's so much power, and particularly through digital transformation, has gone to the consumer business units. I'm going to the cloud, like it or not. And it's all changing, but the security organizations, trying to stay out of the headlines, right? And so they've got to make sure they can see what is happening, and trying to do that in a simple way, because everybody's under cost constraints. Over the next 2 years, operational excellence, for the security teams, is going to be another topic that we'll be talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a bit of kind of the whack-a-mole, right? You can't control it all, truly control it.
Right.
It's changing out from under you. So at the same time, you need a way of understanding what it is, where it is, what's happening.
Yeah, and proximity to a problem, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, if you actually understood relationships, you can say what application, which workload is behind a firewall, which one is not. So then you could work out your prioritization of patching and things like that. If it's all just straight logs and static information, you don't know what's talking to what in the frequency and the volume of those communications.
I want to explore more. Tell us more about, so once you have that kind of information, once you've got that interconnection of relationships and how those things are tied together, what can you do, what should you do?
Well, loads of things. I'll give you a great example. We work with a very large Fortune 500 retailer, and they're across everything, right? So they have CrowdStrike, they have Splunk, they have Azure, they have AWS. They're like Frankenstein, right? Everybody has a little bit of everything. So you circle the value out, and you can see all the relationships, all dependencies. We see things like a Toshiba print server waking up every day and go like, does anybody want to print? Touching every single thing. There's CMDB, in this case it was a Churro CMDB that was out of date. And there's things marked in the CMDB that was like marked that they're already decommissioned, but they were still communicating. So you talk to them and you say, hey, these are still communicating. They're like, yeah, let me go check. They come back, that's our SAP estate. Don't turn that off. It ships garments all over the world. I mean, so the insight that you can get by actually understanding it, and particularly in the modern world, at some point you have a container, and the other point you have a mainframe, and these all things kind of interact in some way, and certainly have a dependency. You can do many more. You can reduce your risk, you can lock things down, but your organization has much more insight of what it should be doing.
Making informed decisions, right?
Yeah.
Before I shut down the
before I shut down the SAP service, maybe I should make sure that that's not the right thing to do.
Update your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
Get out on.
Get ready for Congress, because you're going to be in front of Congress.
Right. Exactly. We're having fun here. So tell me some more about RSA and your take on kind of what's happening here. What are some takeaways you're garnering from this year?
So I've been coming to RSA since about 2002, so 20 years, just about right?
Same for me, yeah.
And I've thrown a party on a Monday night ever since then as well. The fun thing about RSA this year in particular is everybody's back. I mean, I was at the Goldman Sachs party on Monday night at the press club, and my friend Ward runs the IB stuff there. I'm like, Ward, are you normally this popular? And he was like, yeah, it's crazy busy. It's just packed. And it's nice to see people back. They're engaging and they're leaning in, and they want to solve problems. And it's, but at every single event that I've been at over the last 2 days now, 2.5 days, I guess, it's just slammed.
You can't get in a restaurant, or
can't get in a restaurant.
Get a table.
Yeah, you can't get in a restaurant. Can't get anything anywhere. It's crazy.
So a couple of themes of RSA you can kind of pick out. Zero trust is one.
Sure.
Application security, API security.
Yeah.
Things like, what's sort of a VMware take on those topics? How does that fit with you?
Yeah, we're big fans of zero trust. I mean, every time Biden comes out and says we need zero trust, it creates conversations with customers, but also it starts to solve problems for them. So the way we look at zero trust is kind of like there's two parts to zero trust. Like outside in, people like Zscaler do an amazing job of that, and we love Jay Sharder and the people over there. But also, we do it from the inside out, and you should do both in order to secure the enterprise. So we actually can see the reality of what actually is going on between applications and workloads and data flows and everything else, and map that across your estate. So you need to understand that in order to really understand zero trust. But that in combination with the people that do it from the the device and the user in. So two sides of the coin. It's a journey, right? You should always start with discovering what is happening. Otherwise, you have no idea what should. So in both cases with J and Zscaler and and companies like that, you should always start with discovery, but then move into monitoring and then move into control.
Yeah, a big topic around that too is things like cloud native, microservices, the new kinds of contemporary software architectures where they're very API centric, reliant, API first, it's an approach that's called. That, now you're talking about data shipping around in more kind of not public API. Well, you don't know. They may be public, could be public, private, internal, external. That's got to create a whole new kind of fabric of relationships for you to start.
Yeah, and also, you look at the growth of the APIs and the forecasted growth of the APIs. It's just massive. But that's an attack surface that is just out there. And some of those things will keep you awake at night if you actually really understood how bad it could get.
Maybe you don't want to know. Well, we decided that wasn't a good strategy long ago. But
yeah, exactly.
Well, Tim, it's great talking with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Have a chat.
Congratulations on being back and in person.
Yeah, it's been an amazing reunion, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So where can folks find out more about vArmor, check out what you're doing?
Yeah, it's vArmor.com. Come and learn about relationships and how they matter to you and how they should matter to the enterprise. And relationships and dependencies are critical to understanding and securing your enterprise.
Great. Tim Eads, CEO with vArmor. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
This is Techstrong TV.
Well, I have the great pleasure of being joined by Oded Hareven, who is with Achilles.
Thank you so much.
CEO, right?
Is it confusing, all those names, isn't it?
I like it. I think it's a cool name.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, the Achilles name is actually a good story to begin with, if you'd like.
Well, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about you and your background, and you can tell us a lot about Achilles.
So I started my time with cybersecurity around 20 years ago in the Israeli Defense Forces. Started as a programmer and later as an architect, mainly for identity and access management. That's my field, basically. Been there as an officer for 8 years for several sections and teams, and then later I went to work for CA Technologies. So I've done a lot of pre-sales, post-sales, professional services in the Israeli market, basically lots of SSO, IDMs, mostly cybersecurity. After that, a tenure of 5 years at CA, I took some time off from enterprise software security. So I went to become the director of product for a company named MoveIt. That was in the public transportation field. It's a consumer app, basically. We were competing with Google Transit. I left that in 2018 when that was like 800 million users around the world. That was great. And that's it. This is where we started Achilles. So that was around 2018.
Very cool. Excellent. Well, you've obviously been in the identity management space for
for me it's a comeback. For me it's a comeback, and I like it a lot because just those 4 or 5 years when I've done some consumer business, that was for me a good time where the cloud have shifted very strongly, obviously, right?
Well, that's what I want to get into, because identity management 20 years ago is much different than, it's an evolution.
Yeah,
of where
definitely.
It is today.
Yeah.
Tell us about Achilles, what you do, a little bit about the company.
So Achilles is a secrets orchestration platform built to manage secrets, which are credentials, certificates, and keys, right? Especially made to protect those secrets within DevOps, applications, workloads, basically that communicates with each other. So DevOps environments and platforms, DevOps teams themselves, all of those objects within those environments, specifically for hybrid and multi-cloud operations. So this means obviously that we have lots of different use cases around it, right? Secrets as they're being used. In those kind of scripts and platforms, etc. There's a great phenomenon of sprawl of those secrets, right? Within those platforms, within the source code, there's a very famous known compromise of credentials within source codes, right? With GitLab and GitHub, etc. We see that now and often. So basically, all of those locations are using Achilles by fetching those credentials and certificates in runtime, Kubernetes clusters, the scripts themselves, Jenkins, CI/CD, etc. And yeah, basically we provide plugins for that, and those are using it on runtime, so that we are eliminating all of those different secrets and keys and credentials from those environments. So this is how we protect that.
So it's easy to set that up, and then once and putting credentials where they shouldn't go, but then after that, trying to manage it and keep it up to date, more or less secure.
Yeah, well, definitely. You know, back then it was more around human interaction, right? More of a privileged access. But today, what we were seeing, especially in the last 7 years or so, you have once you've had more employees than servers, right? And then something happened the last 10 years, obviously, that you have more machines than employees.
And distribution of all of that, of where that's happening, right? Not inside my data center, in Houston, Texas, or wherever.
Multiple environments, right? So the hybrid is here to stay, as everyone says, right? It's totally true. So once you've had your own on-prem perimeter, so you said, okay, if I have credentials, it's within my on-prem air gap network or whatever. But then today, you cannot say it any longer.
Are we talking about human identity? We're talking about machine to machine. We're talking about the API. What level of identity management are you talking about?
Good question. So what we're basically aiming and started, and this is our bread and butter offering, is the classic secrets management, which is definitely concentrating with or focusing on the machine identities for that sense. So when certain application needs to communicate with each other, they require API keys, they require database credentials, they require those kind of objects, and even SSH keys for that sense. But they're all applications to applications connectivity. With humans, what happened basically in the last year or so is that customers have told us, listen, you're doing that so great. We're basically providing high scale, obviously, coverage globally. We provide 4 nines of availability around the world for that service. This is part of our uniqueness, which is everything provided as a service according to our a very unique technology that provides zero knowledge. We'll speak about that within a minute. But basically, so we've started by focusing on machines, but then customers said, you're doing that so well, why not extending your offering also to human interactions? So this is where we built our add-on, our extension for secure remote access, which is a light PAM offering for that sense. So we went from machine identities and now adding some capabilities for the human identities, especially for the privileged DevOps environments and engineers.
I'm curious, now I've spent some time in the PKI space, in that part of the industry. I'm curious, how do you look at it? Do you look at it differently when you're coming at it from a provider standpoint versus, I'm part of a DevOps software generation process, and it's key storage, vaulting of credentials, secrets, et cetera. But it's also automation and being built into the flow, because you need to do key rotation. Are you serving as the certificate authority for that process across multiple customers, or are you working with third parties? How do you look at that when you're coming at it from a software?
Yeah. So speaking specifically about PKI and certificates, yes, we do act as a certificate authority for internal environments, but we also have the ability to also work with let's say other solutions that complete us, like Venafi for that sense, right? So we have integration with Venafi, we're partners with them. But for any needs, you can also use Aquilus in order to basically issue certificate from Let's Encrypt. So we provide all the APIs for that. We are in charge on the rotation. And this is basically how it works. Now, what's really unique within our service is actually the ability to keep to protect that signing key. For that sense, we do that for AES keys also, but AES RSA keys, we protect keys in a very strong security model based on our patented technology named DFC. DFC stands for Distributed Fragments Cryptography, which basically allows us to run cryptographic operations using fragments of encryption keys without ever combining them. So think like when you're asking us to create an encryption key, we basically create different fragments on different regions, on different cloud providers, and the actual encryption takes place on your environment, right? So we manage the fragments. The actual encryption takes place on your end. Why it does so, using our SDK or a gateway, whatever we provide you, the fragments never leave their location, they are never combined, and therefore the chances of them being compromised as the key be compromised is significantly reduced, right? That thing is also, on top of that, we provide a zero knowledge The zero knowledge feature basically means that you can have your own fragment of the key in which a keyless doesn't have access to. This model basically allows you to enjoy two things at the same time, which is us providing you the service of securing those credentials, securing your encryption keys, but at the same time you get exclusive ownership because neither any one of our employees or federal government can basically access your encryption keys, secrets, etc.
So really keeping them private. Are we talking about private or public keys? Private keys you're talking about.
Private key, the public ones are public, so yeah, we can
in
generate
terms of fragmented keys, is that?
The fragmented key is the private one. So
Hold on. You must have kicked, I think somebody kicked that with your foot. I think you either hit that or hit something on
What
that
happened?
side.
This?
Just lost your audio. There we go.
You got it back?
So what we're going to have to do is, Mitch, you're going to...
I'll start back with that question. Okay.
Yeah, let me just make
I'll
sure
start back with the. So we're talking about private keys here, and how does that work with fractional access?
Yeah. So you asked about whether.
Hold on. Let Mitch re-ask the question again,
Okay.
and we'll
So,
start again.
okay. So you asked whether those are private or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about fractions of keys, I'll ask that question.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
So we'll start in 3, 2, 1. So it's a little late in the day, but doing a lot of.
We can go on and on.
conversations.
Not our
Well,
problem.
we don't have a beverage to share either, so you have to kind of, go with me here at pace. So we're talking about fractions of keys. You're talking about the private keys, correct?
Fragments, yeah, fragments.
Fragments, excuse me.
So private, yeah. So this can be both, private and public. This is about asymmetric algorithms, right? I'll say for the most, obviously, the most famous one. But we're also providing the same protection for symmetric keys, AES for that sense.
Okay.
So the key is not just fragmented or splitted, rather than created as such. So the different fragments are created as such. They are agnostic to each other. They are not familiar with each other, and they're constantly refreshing their mathematical value. So this means that for a malicious attacker to gain access to your key, they need to attack all of those different locations at the same time in a simultaneous attack vector. It's known to be a very complicated to have.
Much more complex.
Yeah. So assuming that you have this ran by a keyless, protected and managed by a keyless, and also your own fragment of the key, all of those fragments are never combined. The actual encryption of the credentials, right? We use the key to encrypt the credentials or to sign the certificates on your environment using the facility that we provide. All of that is SaaS-based, right? So you have complete freedom with your multi-cloud operations, with your hybrid cloud automation. You can consume our service within your on-prem or within any cloud provider that you want. We support any authentication methods for that sense. So you can have workloads in Azure to authenticate to a keyless within using their Azure identity. The same goes with AWS identities. In on-prem, we provide universal identity, which is our own technology. And you're definitely free to run whatever you want, whenever you want it, and that's it.
So I assume you're selling to developers primarily as your audience?
Yeah, so we have two main personas or the worlds where we exist, which is obviously developers or DevOps platform, right? But actually the ones, and we not necessarily start from there rather than security. Security folks, CISOs, Director of Security, VP of Security, IAM, etc. Those are basically our lovable audiences, which they are interested in that world, obviously. They're very, very much focused on it. While we're running our processes with and engagements with our customers and potential customers, we also get into the table the IAM professionals, sometimes also the cloud security and the cloud architect, and sometimes also the crypto team internally within the company.
It's a good example of, in the DevOps world, talk about shift left and DevSecOps, and while those are, I think, good, laudable things to consider doing, it can't mean let's make our developers security professionals, because I can imagine that conversation. Your developer is going to have one set of conversations about how this integrates into our DevOps process, and some knowledge about keys and managing keys and encryption and things like that, certificate authorities or symmetrical, asymmetrical. Your security engineers are going to have a whole then extended set of conversations about, okay, so let's talk about fragmentation, how that works, and a lot of other things that maybe your developers care about, maybe they don't, maybe it's not really germane enough for them to really be that relevant. But both of those together, now you've got a solution that the organization, the corporate security, the cybersecurity team, and can be incorporated into a really effective DevOps flow.
We're peacemakers in that sense. In a way, the fact that we are a security vendor basically allows us to speak the security language, but also we're born in the cloud. So we're a cloud native, cloud born company that speaks the language of DevOps. We play under the same rules. We speak the language of the platforms and the top-notch technology that they're using. And by that, we're able to get the common language between those two worlds, which is obviously very beneficial for us. You've mentioned actually a very interesting point with regards to shift left. What we also see is the requirements of the newer world of DevOps for centralization, and also the convergence of the tools and the requirement to converge a lot of different use cases into one platform. We see that also in the security world, but something happened in the last few years that the DevOps, it's dictating that pace of having more services from one place, right? So think of it, if a DevOps engineer wishes to work with secrets whenever they are, either credentials, certificates, and keys, it is suitable for them and required for them to do all of that all together. So as an example, what we see quite often within our customers is that they're trying, the security force, whenever they're being aware of the problem of secret sprawling within the DevOps environment, they're basically trying to extend their existing PAM offering and to go there to their DevOps teams and say, hey, can you use the PAM, right? Well, because it's credentials, it looks logical. They don't really think about it. Most PAM solutions do not extend well to the cloud native, cloud resource, the ephemeral resources of cloud, right? The whole thing about how to work with cloud. Most of PAM solutions, or some of them, are very heavy in terms of professional services, etc. DevOps do not react to that very well.
I think DevOps and also cloud native. I mean, the pace of change of software and how it's being created, and
you got it.
Smaller units of work and releases, continuous delivery.
You got it.
That's not a world that security people necessarily thrive or have lived in for much at all.
Exactly. So think of it as such. We basically the fact that we're offering SaaS service to manage credentials, certificates, keys, that's like taking the most precious objects out there and basically say, hey, we can run it on SaaS, right? Now, having the security people to actually go through our technology and say, hey, that's legit, you're FIP certified, you're SOC 2 Type 2, ISO, whatever needed, right? In which we are. And by the way, with that, we're very unique, having us to be also FIPS 100-2 certified by the US NIST, right? So having the security to provide like the legitimacy and the credibility, so the DevOps people now can basically see a very good alternative in the market that is able to react very fast, speak their language, cloud native, to really understand the whole thing around ephemeral resources, ephemeral credentials, and this is where we thrive. Basically.
Well, I think another, and I don't mean to be singing your praises here necessarily, but it's different to work with someone who may be a service provider in the PAM space, and so we want the software teams to use that also. It's different to work with somebody who understands software and how software is created and fit into the DevOps flow, DevOps tool chain, and workflow pipelines. And that way, I don't know, if I'm a security professional, maybe I don't understand that world totally, just like a software person will understand the security profession necessarily, but at least I know that they're using a tool that fits how they work. Not I'm kind of force-fitting a security tool into a new domain that they may or may not apply it appropriately.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is about visibility, right? We see that in the world of vulnerabilities. We see that in the world of, right? There are a lot of solutions in those worlds. So what we do is that once we are managing and protecting those different credentials, we're able to send all of that information to the SIEM, right, to the organizational SIEM. We provide full visibility. We also have our own module for insights and analytics. So if the security people wishes to use that, that's also fine. We do our best to basically, again, as I've mentioned, to bridge those two worlds. So to speak the DevOps language with plugins, easy plugins that speaks their language, SDKs in multiple languages. This is not the usual security vendor, right, that speaks their language. So we do that and go back to the security folks and saying, okay, What else do you need in order to have your best visibility, to make sure that you covered everything? You want to see the passwords that are being rotated, the certificates. You want to make sure that all templates are for certificates are short-lived, to make sure that everything is right, secured as it should. And when was the last time that a certain encryption key was rotated? All of those different things, by the way, different use cases, as you can imagine, for years have been provided by different vendors.
Mm-hmm. Selected by different parts of the organization too.
Now think of it like for a CIS organization, they are like crypto things, right? PKI, cryptography, encryption, identity and access management, for humans, for privileged, also, and now for machines, which is where we're starting, right? So all of those different solutions. With time, it seems like we're covering more and more and more and more of those. We do that very efficiently, yet we take our time as being a vendor, it's a startup company. We're now on the road for 3-4 years now, right? So although we already have good, credible, good, strong, big companies that are using our service, we have very good referrals for that. Although we were basically proving the quality of our service and having like 4 nines availability, we have track record of that already. We understand that we need to be very focused about what we provide and not to it's good to expand, but we're taking our time to do it very good, to do it the good way.
Well,
rather than just say, here we're doing this, and that, right? So we see it as a very healthy process in which customers are basically more asking for, can you complete that also? Could you help us also with that realm? Could you also manage those kind of passwords and credentials or other certificates, etc.? And we naturally evolve according to their requirements, and immediately we see feedback from the field. Mm-hmm. So this is how we look at it.
Great. Oded, it's great to talk with you and chat security and software.
Oh yeah, yeah. Hopefully next year again.
Absolutely. Sure. And I've said on a couple of conversations, or my talk tomorrow, I'm doing one on Thursday on API security, but it's all about the software process, because that's where it all happens. Yeah. The proliferation of APIs isn't just because we just decided to write a lot more APIs. It's cloud native. It's microservices.
Exactly.
We're building software differently. That are much more API first. Once you understand that, and it sounds like this is a great conversation to have that you're having with your customers, is understanding that, then you can fit the proper tools to help people in that environment secure those API and software and AppSec and all of it, right?
Music to my ears.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, you should come, and then you can be a cheerleader, but no, I know you're busy, so. Great to have you stop by, and
thank you so much for having me
again.
And
we'll chat.
Definitely. Next time in Tel Aviv.
Okay, that would be great. I would enjoy that. That would be a lot of fun.
That would be great. Thank you.
Folks can find out more. Do you have SDKs, free accounts, things like that?
Yeah, they're free accounts. It's SaaS, so just sign up whenever you want. Akeyless, AKEYLESS.io.
.io. Okay, that's important to know. Great. Thanks again.
Thank you.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Vinay Jusarin, who is CEO for Several Nines, and we're talking about the emergence of sovereign DBaaS, database as a service, for those of you unfamiliar with the term. Hey, Vinay, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, I guess the first question on everybody's mind would be, well, just what the heck is a sovereign DBaaS? So what do we need it, and how does it come about?
Yeah. Well, DBaaS, right, database services, has been around for more than a decade. They are very popular, right? All the hyperscalers provide them, but what the enterprises are telling us is, they are sort of limited, right, in a couple of ways. Organizations need to have, they need to have authority over their data, right? They need to comply with rules, and having data sitting just in a hyperscaler doesn't allow them to comply with these rules, right? Sometimes they need to have them on-prem. They need to have them in a specific region, right? So from that perspective, they need another type of DBaaS that allows them this control over where data is located, right? I think that's probably the biggest thing that we sort of challenge that we see is to be addressed by this sovereign DBaaS, is to give these enterprises the ability to choose where they have their data and to have complete control over that data.
What makes a sovereign DBaaS different from a standard DBaaS? Because some people would say I could deploy a DBaaS on premise. So are there certain attributes about that, or are we just describing more of the use case?
I think, yeah. So the problem is, most of the common DBaaSs, they are hosted in the cloud, right? And typically they are from a hyperscaler, right? So from that perspective, when you store, even if you store data on a hyperscaler in Europe, the data is subject to US laws, not to EU privacy laws, and that's the biggest issue, right? So that's a problem when you have GDPR data, right? GDPR compliant data, and you're storing it in the EU with, for example, like a hyperscaler, but then being a US hyperscaler, the data is shipped over to the US, and suddenly it falls under the US jurisdiction and under the US Cloud Act, right? Which means some of these authorities could access the data without telling the data owner, right? And that's a big problem for even the public sector in Europe, where you can do that, right? You need to tell the authorities. You need to tell you need to get a warrant from the EU. Whereas if you're storing data with a US hyperscaler, a US warrant is enough, and you don't know whether your data is being accessed, right? If you're in Europe. So having a sovereign DBaaS gives you control over where do you put the data, because some data is okay to be right with a hyperscaler, but sensitive data, PII data, right, for EU citizens, you might want to put that with a company which is entirely based in Europe and entirely under the jurisdiction of the European country, where the data is generated.
So will this be more of a federated approach over time? We'll have a DBaaS maybe on premise, and there'll be DBaaS in the cloud. It may be the same, it may be different, but I'm going to have different data stored in different places based on its sensitivity. Is that the goal?
Correct. I mean, let's face it, right? Today, the enterprise, it's not a small, it's not just a couple of databases in a neat data center somewhere, right? The enterprises have been around for a long time. They've bought companies, they've started off with their own data centers. They've utilized the public cloud. Typically we see enterprises using, at least 2 to 3 public clouds minimum, right? So data is not tidy and neatly stored somewhere, right? It's just all over the place. And the issue with enterprises is how do they get control over all that complexity, right? Because at the end of the day, if there is a data leak, they will be responsible and they will be fined and they will be held accountable, right? So they need to have control over all that data. So being able to do it in an easy way is key, right? So from that perspective, sovereign DBaaS, we are not mandating that all your data should be in your data center. No, that's not possible, right? What we're saying is you can put data in your data centers, you can put data in 2 free public clouds, but you can have a single control plane, right, to manage all that, right? And as part of that, it's also all the existing workloads running, which you cannot forklift into a new shiny DBAS, right? Because many enterprises, they have legacy stuff running, and these also need to be managed, right? So for us, the concept of sovereign DBAS is to have this control plane that allows you, that sort of allows you to manage your existing data as well as data that you've decided to put in, on-prem or in public cloud A, public cloud B, right? And typically enterprises, they have compliance teams making those decisions, right? So, it's the business that decides where can this data go, and then it's the role of the infrastructure to enable that business.
I would argue that most organizations have not been especially good at managing data. A lot of them would not get a good housekeeping seal of approval for the way that data gets managed. Do you think that these compliance regulations and data privacy regulations that we're starting to see are forcing that issue, and organizations are revisiting the way they think about data management in the light of, say, a data privacy law?
I think so. I don't know if you remember that about 10 years ago, people, suddenly people had deployed, researchers found 50,000 databases wide open on the internet, right? And a lot of data could be leaked that way, right? And we know now today, this is not okay. So the GDPR says they can fine you up to 20 million euros of your, or up to 4% of your entire revenue, annual revenue, right? California is coming with their own privacy laws, right? I think they're coming up with a new privacy law next year, right? Which is very close to the GDPR, right? So even in the US, you have different states, coming up with privacy laws. And the problem is, if you don't treat your data carefully, if it gets leaked somewhere, this will cost you a lot, right? So from that perspective, enterprises, they need to understand which data they have. They need to have, the sort of, they have to have audited all their types of data. They need to know if it's critical, if it's non-critical, and they need to have control, especially the critical data, because, with all the compliance, like for example, the GDPR, you can get fined, and that will cost the money, but it can cost quite a lot of money.
In the old days, at least, there was a database administrator who kind of took care of all this stuff. But has that function changed as we move to this new era? Are we seeing, we hear a lot about data ops, we hear about chief data officers. I guess I'm wondering who's managing the data, who's minding the store these days?
Yeah, we still have DBAs, right? But if you look at how databases are being deployed today, the majority of new databases are not running on the Oracles, right, or the SQL servers, right? The bulk of the new data goes into open source databases, right? And there, very often you don't have DBAs, right? Full-time DBAs dedicated for these, right? You could do that 20 years ago. You would have specific DBAs for Oracle, for your SQL server. But today, we have mostly DevOps people managing these databases. And the other thing is, look at the application architecture, right? Applications, typically, they are shipping with 3-4 different types of databases. So you can't have specialized DBAs for each database type. So we have the emergence of the DevOps crowd, where they also need to be able to manage their databases. And that's why DBAS is really nice, because you don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of operating the actual database. All that is automated, right? But suddenly, when you take it on-prem, there's no real DBAS on-prem, right? So that is a bit of a problem, which is why enterprises, they want the DBAS experience, the convenience, the automation, right? So what we are seeing is, with the sovereign DBAS concept, right? You have infrastructure to help you automate these databases, so that all these DevOps who are having to juggle with multiple database technologies, they are allowed, they are capable suddenly to manage databases because they have the tool set to do that.
Are we drowning in the data that we're starting to collect? It seems like we have more data than ever. There's more data types than ever. Can the databases handle it, or do we need a lot of different types of databases, or can I aggregate all that data in one central database? What's the strategy?
Yeah, I think we see the emergence of federation technologies because trying to put everything in one box doesn't work, right? And the other thing is we've seen the polyglot persistence movement, right, where you actually have specialized data into specialized databases, right? There's been a bit of a backlash where some of the vendors, they've started doing multi-model databases. So for example, a relational database will be able to do key value data. They will be able to do document stores. They can do multiple things in the same database so that you don't have to have multiple databases because it's more complex, more database types. But what we see is that it doesn't really work, right? The databases, although they can manage different types of data, they don't do it very well. Many enterprises today, if you look at surveys, they are still running typically an Oracle SQL Server. They are running MySQL. They are running MongoDB. They're doing Redis with some in-memory data. They might be doing Elastic. So there's a whole variety of databases which are being used today, and I think the issue is how do they get a grip on all these different data stores, because now you also have the multi-cloud, you have the hybrid experience where they have both data in different clouds and on-prem. So I think federating access across these different sources, having some kind of easy control plane to keep track of all these databases and to operate them is something that where we see the enterprises going. And there hasn't, we have seen a lot of companies building their own databases for that, right? Their own control planes, their own homemade DBaaS, right? To try to operate databases in multiple locations and multiple types of databases, because that type of capability hasn't been on the market.
So Several Nines does what exactly? Are you providing the DBaaS, or do you have a dedicated database, or do you let me choose which type of database it's going to be?
Yeah, so we've been around for about 10 years, and we've been working on database automation from day one. And we automate the most popular databases on the market. We don't do Oracle, but we do SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, Redis, Elastic, and so on, right? We're kind of staying away from Oracle because typically people using Oracle, they already have their own systems for that, right? So we automate databases, we've been doing it for 10 years. And sovereign DBaaS, the name is really what we see, people calling it today, because we've seen that with all these compliance issues, with all these multi-cloud complexities, and then databases running on-prem. So you have these hybrid environments. We see the sovereign DBaaS as a proper name, right, for the concepts that we've been building for 10 years. So database automation is the key thing that we've been building on, helping enterprises automate their databases, wherever they want to automate them.
All right, cool. So last question, do you think that AI will help us manage data in the future? Because automation is part of the equation and everybody's talking about AI these days, but how far can we go?
I think, definitely we have a bit of AI ourselves, right, in our software. I think, when you talk about, managing large amounts of data, a lot of things need to be automated, right? So for example, we use machine learning algorithms to do failover, for example, right? Because a database can fail in many different ways, and we need to fix it, whatever, right? We need to replace the human, right? Instead of having a DBA who logs in, understand what's going on, look at the logs, and actually, perform procedures. We automate all that so that you don't have to do it, right? No human will need to do that. So we automate a lot of things, and I think yeah, I mean, we see AI has a role in there, right? And there are other things that AI is doing. For example, automatic tuning of databases. There are some startups focusing on that, right? Oracle has done a lot of research. Even IBM has done a lot of research in the last decades on auto tuning your workloads. And I think that's one area that probably needs to hit the open source database market, right? To having these artificial intelligence ways of automating performance improvements and tuning. But I think we've done a lot around keeping things up and running and doing failover, automating failover. But yeah, there are still areas to be done, so that at the end of the day, you want to end up with the machine doing all the automation, 100% of the database automation, so that you don't need any human involvement.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, guys. Never lose control of your data, and there's tools to make that happen. Vinay, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Yotam Segev, who's CEO for Sierra, and we're talking about ghost data and how much there is, where it all is, and what the implications are from a cybersecurity perspective. Yotam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Where does all this ghost data come from? It's hard enough to secure the data that we know about, but how much more of this data is running around out there that we don't know about?
So I think the problem starts with the way we store it. So we're used to thinking about storage as we think about our garage. It has 4 walls, and you can pile up stuff in there, but at some point it gets full. And then you notice that you have too much. But the cloud is not like that. It's extensible. Essentially, you can keep on growing the garage as you collect more and more stuff. And I think that when we think about ghost data, that's the first thing that we have to understand, the change in the world. Essentially, the cloud providers are always happy to accommodate more and more accumulation of data in different formats and ways in their services. And this allows for a new reality where data can get piled up continuously with no limit.
Is this data, part of the whole notion of end users are just firing up their own applications and there's all this shadow IT? And is this where all this stuff is ultimately coming from? And if so, are there means or mechanisms to track it, find it, secure it? Or do I have to, just kind of suck it up and hope for the best?
So first of all, there are means to find it and secure it. And that's part of what Sierra does and part of our mission. To help you keep the data hygiene in your cloud environments at the highest level possible. I think that what's causing this phenomena is something that's almost human nature. We always like to keep a little spare. We always like to keep something for a rainy day on the side. And when there's no mechanism that comes in and validates that we get rid of that at some point, then we just become hoarders. And we hoard and we hoard. And part of what we're doing in Sierra is helping organizations realize this, be able to tell the useful things apart from the things that haven't been used for years. Nobody's been touching them, and they're just sitting around exposing us to risk and costing us money. And helping organizations get rid of them in a way that they can really accept. Right? Like, we know that nobody's been touching this for 3 years. Maybe it's time to say goodbye.
How aware are people of this issue? I mean, I think you guys have some recent data points on this, but is it a big problem, little problem, or is it a problem we just don't know about?
So we're seeing that it's a much bigger problem than we even imagined when we started going down this path. And we're seeing that 30% of the cloud data plane for many of the organizations we're working with is just ghost data. It's snapshots of databases where the database itself, the original database, no longer exists. But the snapshots are still around, sometimes unencrypted, sometimes in the wrong regions. And this exposes the organization to cost, but it also exposes the organization to risk. because it grows the attack surface and exposes the organization to ransomware risk, exposes the organization to breach risk. And these are all things that we'd rather avoid.
Do the bad guys know about this? Are they out actively looking for ghost data? Do they have a suspicion it exists, and do they know how to find it?
I don't think the bad guys care that much whether the data is ghost or not ghost. They care about what's easy to access and what's not being monitored. And the fact of it is that ghost data is usually both of those things. It's lying around, nobody's monitoring it, oftentimes nobody's aware of it, and it can easily be manipulated, stolen, encrypted by malicious actors for different uses. And as we're seeing the ransomware community evolve into what's called the double extortion, right? I encrypted the data, but I also stole the data, and I'm trying to leverage both of those elements to extort the company. Ghost data exposes us very significantly to the second one, to the data being stolen. I'm not even aware of it. I find out one day when I read an article on the Washington Post that my organization's data has been exposed on Pastebin or some other website.
Who's in charge of securing the data these days? Is it the security team, or is it supposed to be the people who created the data in the first place? I mean, ultimately, doesn't somebody have to take responsibility for their own actions, as they say?
So I think that you're hitting on one of the most painful topics in the modern enterprise reality. And it comes from responsibility and accountability, which are always the core issues for many of the things we face as in big organizations. What we're hearing from the practitioners is that the security teams, the CISO office, feel that they're responsible to enable the data owners to take responsibility for the security of the data. So it is a joint collaboration, a joint effort between the business owners and the security teams. And what we're trying to do with Cyera is bridge that gap, create a conversation that's understandable to both parties and enables the democratization of the responsibility, of the security responsibility from the security team to the actual business owners, data owners across the organization.
Do you think someday we might be able to apply machine and deep learning algorithms to help solve this problem? What might be the role of AI in all of this in the future?
Why someday? I think the day is today. AI and machine learning are pretty much mature technologies. They have a lot of impact on modern software solutions and modern software products. And I think that they have a lot of value to provide us in being able to identify data, a lot of value to provide in being able to analyze anomalous data being stored and anomalous access to data in different environments. And this is just the beginning. I think that the ability to prioritize intelligently, the ability to correlate between different data in different places in the environment, all of these and more are things that are available and becoming a reality today. And weren't the case when DLP was the hottest and biggest term in data security 15 years ago.
As we go along, do you think that all these data privacy regulations that are starting to emerge is going to force this issue because organizations are being held more accountable for where data is, regardless of who created it or whether it's ghost data or not?
Yes, I believe that with all my heart. And I'll add to that. I think that the privacy regulations that we're seeing, in my mind, they're the tip of the iceberg. The change that I see, the change that I see around me is much more fundamental. I think that it's fair to say that the world's outlook on data has changed. It's not the same outlook. And the privacy regulations are one aspect, one means in which countries or states are trying to push companies, commercial organizations to take more responsibility for the data they're collecting. But I think that we're going to see many more aspects and many more facets of this fundamental change about the way people look at data, the way people understand the value of data, and the way people demand that if you're going to be collecting a lot of private personal information about me, about my children, about my family, you're going to have to take good care of that information. or else we have a problem, or else we're not in agreement about the way we move forward. And I think that the privacy regulations are the tip of that today, but we're going to see many more data regulations and data requirements becoming more stringent over the next years.
And to your point, a lot of organizations seem to think that when they collect data, that somehow or other they now own that data, when in reality, perhaps they're just mere custodians of that data, and we need to change our mindset accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the basic changes that the privacy regulation and the privacy, almost I would say, syntax, right? Like the way we talk about privacy brought about. And more organizations are realizing this, that they're a custodian and what is their role as such. So yes, I feel that's absolutely right.
Yeah. So what's your best advice to folks to go deal with ghost data and this new age of data that we're looking at? Where should they get started? What do you look at and just makes you shake your head these days?
Mm-hmm. I think that there is a conception for a lot of security people that data is an advanced layer of security, that it's something that you get to once you're mature. And I think that conception is one of the worst things that are happening to organizations today, because the reason they feel that way is because there was no easy way to deal with the data in the past. But those ways exist today. Like we said about machine learning, AI, data science, NLP, all of these technologies, as well as the cloud migration, are making the ability to access data, understand data, know your data so much more accessible than it was in the past. And I think that being open to that change, accepting that change, trying that change is going to be the greatest things that move security forward from where it was, focused around the infrastructure, to where it should be, focused around data.
Yeah. How do I drive that change? Do I just throw everybody in a room and lock the door until we get agreement? Or is there somebody else who's taking control or going to be in charge of all this?
I think the CISOs are going to remain in charge of this for quite some time. The office of the CDO, the privacy officer have a lot of impact on what the organization needs to achieve, but they're less in the technical controls and the technical operational aspects of achieving that inside of the organization. And I think that joining hands, coming together to solve this problem, all of the different stakeholders, the business, the IT, security, and what we see as the data office, the privacy office, joining hands and tackling this together is the way to go forward.
Yotam, thanks for being on the show and sharing your knowledge and insights.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It was a pleasure.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on our coverage of the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit here in Austin, Texas. We're at the JW Marriott Hotel. We'll be streaming live through the day. We have a bunch of different speakers lined up to talk to us. I should mention from the outset, before we introduce our first guest, is today is,
what do they call it, Dave? It's not 0 day, but it's
co-located events.
Co-located events day, so the main open source summit actually starts tomorrow. Today there are a number of co-located events though that have kicked off. The Open Source Security Foundation, I know, is one. FinOps is another one. There's 2 or 3 others that I don't recall right now. Do you?
I don't.
No. There's others as well. So a lot of people in hall. It's a little quiet where we are here, which is pretty cool. But there's a lot of people in the various rooms listening to some amazing content. With that said, though, let me introduce you to our first guest here this week. Their name is Ava Black. Hey, and we had a little conversation off camera. I should have just clue you in. You know, sometimes I still mess up the they pronouns, and so Ava's promised to help me. So if I mess up, she'll correct us, and hopefully they'll correct us. Excuse me. There we go, first one. Yep. And we're doing the best we can with it. Anyway, Ava, that was a lot of preamble. Tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, today I work at Microsoft in the office of the CTO. I've been doing open source contributions and community leadership for about 23 years now. So I also sit on a couple different boards. I got elected to the board of the Open Source Initiative last year and the OpenSSF TAC, which is part of why I'm here today at the OpenSSF Day earlier this year.
For people who aren't familiar with TAC?
Technical Advisory Committee. So we're sort of we're not the governing board, but the OpenSSF Technical Advisory Committee guides, supports the technical projects in the OpenSSF.
So it's not the board of directors governing board that are making sort of, if we want to call it, business decisions. It's really the technical advisory where you know, what it's at a much more technical level of what
I'd say the two go hand in hand. The board makes the business decisions around finance and events and marketing, and the TAC makes the technical decisions around what projects become part of the OpenSSF, how projects are governed, what the structure, sort of the templates for projects should become.
Absolutely. And I want to delve more into the OpenSSF, and especially from a technical point of view, some of the things that they're involved in, some of the other things that you're involved in around that. But before we do that, I wanted to come back to this side and talk about your keynoting tomorrow.
I am.
And not to let the cat out of the bag, but I wanted to have you talk a little bit about it. And before Ava does, though, I want to remind you all that in addition to the live in-person aspect of this event, it is virtual. So if you're watching us on Techstrong TV or Facebook or LinkedIn or DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, wherever you're watching this, there's still time for you to register and tune into Ava's keynote tomorrow, as well as the whole week where it is a full roster of some great sessions you can check out. So check that out at Linux Foundation Open Source Summit. But Ava, go ahead.
Without giving too much away, I'm really excited to give the opening keynote tomorrow on community, codes of conduct, inclusivity, how to build sustainable, diverse communities, really. And it's a bit of a short one. It's just going to be about 5 or 6 minutes. Kick off the morning with that content. Part of the backstory is that we're in Texas, and Texas has been passing some rather, I'd say some laws or some things that are not in accordance with our values around diversity. So I'm going to talk about that and what we can all do to make our communities more inclusive. Then a longer discussion I have on Thursday on code of conduct, not as a tool of punishment, but as a tool of restoration and support for communities on Thursday afternoon.
I love it. Look, as someone who lives in Florida, who am I to say anything? I mean, quite frankly, we've got our own issues, but I don't even want to get into it. But let's talk a little bit about the code of conduct. So in my mind here, there's 2 aspects. Number one is, look, we struggle at Techstrong, right? We run DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, Techstrong TV, Digital CXO, so more than several brands. And we are challenged around diversity, right? Finding speakers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we do a lot of webinars, we do a lot of video panels. And if you couldn't tell, I'm a white male, right? So when I host something, we already got one white guy on the table here. We are constantly looking for diversity, and quite frankly, it's a challenge, right? Especially as we go deeper technically, it's like there's an inverse law there, right? Where my pool becomes smaller, and so we're always looking, right? Always trying to find, people who will represent a more diverse community when we do these kinds of video events. But I don't think we're alone, right? It's not just Techstrong. It's not just my company.
No, everyone's working on this,
Yeah.
and everyone should be working on this. It's not a pipeline problem. There's no shortage of women and non-binary people who want to work in tech. We have to make our communities welcoming for them to stay.
Yeah. I think you hit a nail on the head there. And let me just mention, it's not just non-binary or even women. It's people of color.
Absolutely. Yep.
You know, we do something down home in Florida. There's a school that opened near us called Boca Code, where they teach people to be full stack developers. And we sponsor a scholarship called Engineering the Change. We're actually doing a whole video series on it. But we've been doing it for 2 years. And we look for people who, underrepresented communities.
Right.
And even there, it's hard. I mean, quite frankly, getting people to apply, and, it's a 12-week intense class. A lot of people don't want to put
or don't have the privilege, right, to dedicate 12 weeks, the financial investment of that, as well as the time away from family or child care, whatever it might be.
We've seen it firsthand.
Don't have that.
No, it's a hard push. So, so that's one aspect, right? Is just finding the right people. But then there's the second piece of it, and I think you touched on it, which is how do you keep them? How do you nourish them? How do you nurture?
How do you build a community of practice in open source? Because that's what we're here to talk about, is open source.
Yep.
How do you build that in a way that such a diverse community feels continually welcome? And when there are crises, when there are incidents, toes get stepped on, accidents happen. My experience working in consent incident response for about 7 years now, 95% of the time it's an accident. But you still have to work at it. People still have to recognize the harm they did cause, make amends, learn, do better. And that's how we make communities safer. We also do need to identify the few percent of people that are just being malicious. And it's a real challenge. The few people that are trying to do harm. So.
I don't want to focus on them because they are a really, really small minority.
It really is, yeah.
I think the problem is when that small minority runs into public policy. Like, are all those people elected officials? Unfortunately, I don't know what goes on.
I don't know.
But, I mean, for those out there who, maybe deal with this issue, without giving that minority more than they're due, do you just ignore them? Do you somehow try to cut them out like you excise a tumor?
That's an analogy. The one I like to talk about is called the analogy of a broken stair, right? We can't just ignore when there's someone in a community who's actively harming any minority in that group. What happens when we do ignore that is the folks who are in the community for a long time know, oh yeah, just don't work with that person. We know that they just, always try and do X, or they're always kind of bad, just ignore them. But new people come in, especially from underrepresented backgrounds, and don't know that yet, and get caught. They trip on the broken stair. And so for that reason, we need groups like a Code of Conduct Committee, which I was on in Kubernetes for a while, to identify these situations, reach out to that person, offer to work with them to address this. Not just automatically, excise the tumor, but offer to support them, assuming good intention from the beginning. And if they then demonstrate a lack of good intention, then and only then push them out.
Excellent. So I want to talk a little bit about open source, though, and Look, I've been involved in open source software on the security side a long time, 25 years, something like that. Yeah.
Same, yeah, 99 for me is when I got in.
Yeah, with Snort and Nessus and Nmap. But anyway.
Yep.
But the nice thing about the open source community is I've always felt it was a much more welcoming,
Yeah.
big tent kind of community, as opposed to, maybe some others. So, I mean, with all due respect, I think it's almost easier to do these codes of conduct kind of enforcement, or, enforcement seems like you have a stick. But, putting out that, stewardship, great word, in the Linux Foundation. Yeah. It's much harder when we go to, like, in security at the RSA show or Black Hat or DEF CON.
Well, it's not impossible in those situations.
No, it's not. I have a lot of friends who are non-binary.
We can look at some of the InfoSec conferences that have done a really good job and some that have tripped multiple times. There's a recent incident with one of the B-sides that's all over Twitter the past couple days. I'm not going to point attention to it more than that. Mm-hmm. But we can see examples of good and bad.
That is. And kind of what surprised me with the one you're talking about. Look, I was at the very first B-sides Las Vegas. Long time ago.
You beat me there.
Oh, yeah, I was there the first time when they did it.
Cool.
I was at the first B-side San Francisco.
I love that event.
I was a wrangler one year for B-sides Vegas, too. Anyway, I'd sponsor wrangler. Mm-hmm. But the whole B-sides movement, much like Linux Foundation, was a very inclusive movement from the get-go. Jack Daniels and the team did a great job. Yeah. It bummed me out a little bit to see that happen in a B-sides.
Yeah, it bummed me out a lot too. I've had a lot of trust for the B-sides community, and I know they're sort of syndicated or franchised.
And you don't want to make blanket, kinds of things.
But as a whole, I've always had good experiences in B-sides.
Me too.
But this sort of touches on something else, right? Inclusivity feeds into security.
Okay, talk to me.
If someone doesn't feel safe to be themselves in a community, to put on my sort of deeper InfoSec hat, right? Part of, as I understand, going for clearance is making sure there's no compromise, things like that. So if people need to feel safe emotionally to contribute, lest someone be able to push them out or apply leverage or scare them in some way. And so from that angle specifically, inclusivity is a security issue. From another one, it's a sustainability issue. You're talking about wanting to have diverse communities, but to do that, we have to have people who contribute to open source, pick up the axe, the bucket of water, chop wood, carry water, that analogy, and then stay around for a long time, and then teach the next generation.
Yeah.
That's about sustainability, especially in our security projects in open source. We have to encourage that.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were reading about, harassment and so forth at worse than harassment, even, attacks at some InfoSec shows. So I don't want to give a false impression. We've made progress.
We have more to go.
Sit here and look back.
Yeah.
It's just that, there's more to be done. One other quick point on the diversity thing, and then I want to get a little technical. Look, you are who you are, and you've been doing this a long time. I am who I am. I've been doing this a long time. It's very different when you're 22 years old, coming out of school, and you're dealing with life in its entirety, and you are either non-binary or there's something else. You're a person of color, whatever. You're coming into this industry, right? And I mean, people could look at you and say, they're a role model. I did it.
I could hope.
Did that
good job.
right.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you. They're a role model.
I'm so honored that people.
Yeah,
think
no,
that.
I mean, but that's the truth, right? But they look at you and say, well, they've been around a long time. They may not know the bumps and bruises along the way to get to where you are today, right? And they may not understand. Yeah. Well, hopefully it's easier for them, right? Because there have been trailblazers who kind of did this. But talk to people coming into our communities now whether it be InfoSec or open source or just technology in general, what advice do you give to non-binary, other underrepresented communities here? Do you just damn the torpedoes full speed ahead? Or, what's the right advice?
I don't know that there is any one right answer, or certainly not a one-size-fits-all answer, but to anyone non-binary, trans, gender non-conforming, other minorities coming into InfoSec or open source, I'd say find your people, stick together, and find supportive communities, work in them, help grow them, help pass on that knowledge and make safety for others. And communities that become more welcoming will thrive. Those that are not welcoming will not thrive, and that's part of the nature of open source.
I love it. All right. We probably took a lot of time, more than we wanted to, but we still have more time. Let's talk a bit now. So you're doing another session. I thought you said it was tomorrow afternoon?
Yes, tomorrow afternoon. I'm giving a talk on GitBomb, which is a terrible name. People should never let me name open source projects.
You named this one?
I named this one. I'm one of the two co-founders. It is, so we've repurposed part of Git. It's a version control system, but under the hood, it's actually a blockchain, believe it or not.
Okay.
It's a Merkle tree. And so we repurposed part of that to handle software supply chain security in a particular way that others aren't doing yet. And this is complementary to SBOM, Software Bill of Materials.
Right.
It's complementary to software signing projects like SigStore. It's complementary to build integrity, sort of build observation like in Toto. It solves a different problem, and that is, how do I know what's in this package? What's in this tin? I like the analogy of a can of soup. And say, oh, it's Campbell's chicken noodle soup. You kind of know what it is and if you want to buy it.
Right.
If you have allergies, you can look at the back and say, well, does it contain these allergens? But that's not enough information for a recall. If you buy soup and there happens to be a recall, the store could actually call you up and say, hey, that can of soup, does it have this 10-digit number stamped on the bottom of it? Because they know how to trace back from the factory or the farm that it came from when there's a salmonella outbreak or something, all the way through the supply chain to the store to who bought it. I want to enable that kind of artifact resolution across the supply chain in open source at zero cost to developers and projects. I want it to be automatic in our build tools for every small project out there that doesn't have a budget to run big infrastructure, so that everyone who's consuming open source software has more ability to trust what's in it. This doesn't solve security problems, but it helps people discover later on, after it's been built and downloaded and being run in production, if there's a known vulnerability somewhere deep in the dependency chain, like Log4j.
Two things.
Yeah.
So first of all, you had a very interesting conversation with my friend Chen-Si Wang at RSA a couple weeks ago around SBOM specifically, but around this whole idea now of starting to kind of really delve into the ingredients, if you will.
Yeah.
And Chen-Si's a smart woman. She brought up a interesting point, which is this isn't soup, this is software. And if I start giving you the recipe for my software, what's to stop you from spinning up your own version of it? And if it's open source, well, that's fine. You're allowed to do that. But if it's not open source, will proprietary software folks be willing to play when they realize that they're giving out their recipes?
So that's a totally great point, and one we have taken into consideration. The GitBomb project doesn't give out the recipe. It's just giving out the fingerprint, the little barcode of things, not the details of how you made it or put it together. And for commercial software, because it's a Merkle tree, there's a tree structure, a vendor who's combining open source and proprietary software can choose to selectively truncate the tree, distribute the rest of the tree with a stub there that you can then reattach under NDA if a customer asks.
Got it. I love it. Now, next question on this area that I want to explore is, what's the is the goal here to be potentially to get, like you mentioned, artifacts, get like maybe JFrog Artifactory to include it with all of their artifacts in their repo, or maybe in the Nexus, not Nexus, Nexus sonatype
or MITRE.
Or MITRE even too,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where this heads?
This is where it could go, yeah. In the Gitbomb project, it's open source. I'm not focusing on any of the commercialization of this, but I can see ways where companies like those or SNCC, who just joined the project, could totally commercialize on this or build capabilities into their scanning tools. So that's possible. That it would, and I think enabling that isn't our primary goal, but it's certainly secondary, and we're taking it into account.
Okay. I also just want to be clear that Gitbomb is not part of Open OSSF or Linux at this point.
Correct, at this point in time. But that's also a normal part of the process of the OpenSSF. Projects usually spin up in kind of a neutral, non-affiliated space, and then when they have a community around them, they reach a certain maturity level, then they might apply to join a foundation like the OpenSSF and go through a review process. And so if I speak from my role on the OpenSSF Technical Advisory Committee right now, I'm actually helping to define that process for project intake in a way that supports everybody.
Will there be sort of a defined thing, sort of like you have in CNCF with sandbox, incubation, all the way through to graduation?
We are working on that right now. We have a proposal getting ready to share from the TAC to the governing board pretty soon that defines all that. It's analogous to the CNCF, but not exactly the same, because we are a different foundation with different needs.
And they have your own thing. All right. Last thing. For people who want more information around Gitbomb, where can they go?
Gitbomb.dev.
That's easy. And I assume it's probably on GitHub too?
It's up on GitHub. We have a GitHub org. I think it's git-bomb on GitHub, and just gitbomb, gitbom.dev, or tune into my talk Tuesday afternoon.
And you can do that even if you're not here in Austin. Again, as I said in the beginning, if you missed it, it is available as a virtual event. Well, Ava, this was probably the longest 15-minute interview you've ever done. But I want to thank you for, we had a lot to cover. We had a lot to cover. I want to thank you. Thank you for all you do, not just for being on our show, but for all you're doing for communities around open source and elsewhere, as well as the security work.
Thanks so much for having me, Alan.
My pleasure. Thank you. Ava Black here on Techstrong TV. We're live in Austin. We'll be back soon with some other interesting folks to speak with.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, we're back here live again. Thursday morning, Moscone West, RSA conference. The escalators are filled with people going up and down and up. Sessions are on, keynotes are starting. We're wrapping up our last day of RSA today. I'm really happy to be joined with someone who I've been interviewing at RSA for a really long time. Couple of decades. Actually, before we even were interviewing him, back in my still secure days, of course, we had a vulnerability solution, VAM, Vulnerability Access Management. And back then, a game changer in the vulnerability management space was the advent of the CVEs, right, from the MITRE Corp, where they started rating vulnerabilities by severity and criticality, etc. And it was about 15, no more, 18, 20?
Well, they started rolling out in the fall of 1999.
When did you present here?
That was 2001.
So this is when I first met this man. His name's Bob Martin. He's with MITRE. In 2001, Bob stood up on stage here at RSA and introduced the whole concept of CVEs for vulnerability management. And the world of vulnerability management has never been the same. Here we are 2 decades later, 2022. Bob is up on stage this year
where he spoke about
supply chain security.
And, I have a feeling supply chain security may not be the same again.
Well, it's from your lips
to God's ears, right?
Yes.
I hear you, Bob. So welcome. First of all, Bob, welcome.
Well, glad to be here. Glad to see everyone.
Yep.
It's really a lot of connections and new people, too.
And it is good to see the new people. But you know what? If no one's told you here this year, I'll tell you. Thank you. Thank you for all that you've done over the last decades.
Well, I'll take that thanks and I'll spread it across the big team.
Yeah, it
of
is
people
a big team.
in MITRE and in the community, and that's the key to these kinds of things.
It is. It takes a team.
Yep.
It takes a community. And
it has to also not just be some technically neat way of doing something. It has to make business sense.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a big part of this. And that's where our work in what we call the system of trust on supply chain really, we think, is going to be something that industry is going to find as much or more value than MITRE's customers in the federal government. MITRE is a not-for-profit. We run what are called federally funded research and development centers for many parts of the federal government in the U.S. But our mission is really to go out and change the problem space into something a little more tractable.
Yep, agreed. I think most of our audience, they've heard MITRE and your little definition there, I think helps out. Let's talk supply chain. Talk about your talk here.
Why not us? Everybody else is talking about supply chain.
Yes, that appears to be for sure.
Yep. No, the whole approach we're taking on supply chain is that there are experts in supply chain, but then there's everyone else that's really struggling to get a grip on it and trying to understand what are the risks they need to get a handle on and look into. And there's really no place that they can look to understand and appreciate what they may need to look at. So what System of Trust primarily is trying to do, or at least the first step, is what are all those supply chain risks from your supplier, the service offerings and supplies that you may need to address. Now, we're not going to say everybody needs to do all that, right? So the other step of this is a way of managing to slim down to some subset. We call it a profile that's appropriate to the business decision you're making, your situation, your context, your timeline. And so you basically start with a common place and get to a precise place for you. Yet it's traceable back to that. Yes, I pulled it from here.
Yep.
So as the community helps us make sure that bigger picture is full and rich with specifics, you can still get down to something that makes sense and it fits your needs constraints. And so that profile then is what you would go and do an assessment against. And we actually are going to be offering a scoring mechanism inside there.
Really?
But one that can be adjusted, because what you think of as a risk, I may say, I'm
this
not
is
worried
a
about
learning
that.
from the whole CVE.
Oh, yeah. No, we need to get those two together. And we also want to make sure that when you get down to those specific risks, some people may not know how do I get a handle on that risk? What do I look at? Where do I get data about it? Do I need to do some kind of a test? Do I need to go look at some data source? So we're going to be giving as much guidance as we can as to where to go get things. That may be just general research in a specific area, or it may be go to a specific vendor that offers that kind of information, or some public website that offers that. But there's going to be a lot of it where you actually have to dig in and do something. Especially if you get into, small, non-publicly traded companies, you may have to do a questionnaire, but there's some work that the DHS ICT Scrum Task Force did on a common vendor questionnaire. So we're looking to make that machine consumable so you could distribute it, get it back. We can bring the answers in to System of Trust as a starting point.
Wow.
So there's a whole bunch of things here. We're really hoping to get
sounds well thought out.
But it also sounds like there's still a lot more to come.
There is. We really need the community, both vendors, people who have supply chains, because we're all, in supply chains.
Yep.
Very, you're a consumer of some things, but you're a supplier of others. And also there's a lot of different situations, in industry, they have regulations they have to follow, government, they have their rules. So all these things, we need to figure out how to factor them in. And it's like CV, like CWE, like STIX, TAXI, the attack framework. We need the contributions so that this really meets the need of the community. And so one of the things we're doing here, we have a public website, System of Trust, sot.miter.org. It's out there to start. It's going to be fleshed out, but we really look forward to people getting engaged on this.
Well, look, if there's a right organization to lead this sort of effort, I can't think of a better one than MITRE.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yep. We had our DevSecOps event Tuesday. And of course, supply chain security is on everyone's lips here. And I saw a very Chensi Wang, probably no Chensi. She had a very interesting take about an aspect of software or of supply chain security that perhaps we haven't thought about. And that was the whole IP issue.
Yep.
Right? In our rush to be transparent about our supply chains, do we need to think about in making them so easily accessible?
Well, so that's a big misnomer, I think, in many.
Okay.
So I think you're getting into the whole software bill of material and how you make that available and transparent. It doesn't preclude you from protecting your intellectual property.
Okay.
So the idea of an SBOM is, can you articulate what's in your software? Not that can you put it on a public website somewhere. So the idea is, one, can you get it? Can it be machine consumable? Can you include provenance, pedigree, some integrity information? But it's a starting point. It's a critical one, but most of the customers are going to want other things. They're going to know, well, what testing was done? How was the development done? So there's going to be other things you need to get into that. And I think if you look at the executive order 14028 that came out last year, it actually said, well, yes, you need an SBOM if you're going to sell to the federal government. It doesn't say it needs to be some public place, but it also asks for claims against what you did building that software that you have the SBOM for. And so that's another big part. And I actually talked about that as part of my talk, in that there's some efforts, a project called Salsa in the IETF, which is a language and a way of talking about those claims. But another part of that is coming out of the IETF and Linux Foundation. It's basically called Supply Chain Integrity, Transparency, and Trust. And so, it's basically the idea of, some way of capturing, maybe in a ledger, these kinds of claims. So an SBOM is a claim.
Yep.
So are all these other things you may want to state. Well, you can also, as an organization, say, I have a policy that, if I'm developing software doesn't go from here to here until certain things are done. And so you could use this ledger to actually gate and control how things flow. There's a project in Linux Foundation called In Toto that does that a little differently. But the idea is keep track of what's going on and also know what should have been going on, right? But the final part of this is that's the manufacturing of software. Then you step back and say, okay, now there's the marketplace of software. Right? So somebody's creating this ledger entries, putting all of these statements and third party and first party. I'm an enterprise. I can have a policy about what kinds of attestations, what claims and evidence I need for things to come in. and I can go put that out in the ledger too. And then I have a guard function.
Right.
And so when a user at my company says, I want some software, the guards, the request goes out, you pull our policy and the attestation claims and stuff and see if they match. Okay, you can come in now. So I think there's some interesting way.
No, there absolutely is. And I love the ability to customize at that end user level, if you will, because not one size doesn't fit all. We've learned this over and over.
Some people are very adventurous, and some people are conservative.
Yep, and that's what makes the world go round.
Right.
Bob, I want to thank you for stopping in.
Well, thanks for having me.
You're a treasure, man. Hope to see you here next year, and then maybe in some other events. But keep up the great work.
Appreciate that. Take care.
You know what? Before we leave, the website for people to go.
Oh, sot.miter.org.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. We're live here at RSA. We're going to be back with our next guest in just a moment.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. I know I sure did. We had a fantastic lineup full of interviews today to give you the latest news on the tech industry. From our extensive coverage at conferences to our episodes of View with Vizard, and even our airing of the first episode of Engineering the Change, we have plenty of great content. We will not be airing an episode of Techstrong TV on Monday on accounts of it being Labor Day. So go out there, have some fun, take a little you time, and we'll see you again on Tuesday, September 6th. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.